Right, I think the technology is sorted, so we'll resume. And I invite Miss Daly if you want to call your first witness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Mr. Reynolds.
Good afternoon.
Can I ask you to take up your main proof of evidence, please? We'll start at the beginning, section
Yep,
1. You tell us there that you hold a master's degree in urban design from the University of Westminster and a degree in postgraduate diploma in landscape architecture from the University of Gloucestershire. You tell us that you're a chartered landscape architect with the Landscape Institute and a recognised practitioner with the Urban Design Group, and that you have almost 25 years of experience working in private practice around the UK.
correct. Yeah,
You also tell us you're an expert advisor on urban design and landscape architecture to the Northern Ireland Ministerial Advisory Group on Architecture and the Built Environment, and you're chair of the Design Review Panel for Hackney and Design South East. And of specific relevance to this appeal, you're the chair of the North Hearts District Council Design Review Panel, and you've previously reviewed the Framework Master Plan for the East of Luton scheme.
correct. Yes.
At paragraph 1.1.3, you tell us a bit more about your experience working in the public and private sector for more than 20 years. 1.1.4, you tell us that you joined Tapestry, a practice that you co-founded in 2011. You joined in 2017 as a full-time director. And in paragraph 1.1.5, you tell us that you've prepared evidence for and appeared as an expert witness at multiple planning appeals and hearings. And over the page, 1.1.6, you tell us that you are a member of the Landscape Institute's Knowledge and Practice Committee and that you're chair of both the London branch of the Landscape Institute and the Urban Design Group. Is that all correct?
It is all correct. Yes.
Good, thank you very much. You then tell us at sections 1.2 and 1.3 of your proof about your role and the scope of your evidence. There's nothing I'd like to pick up there. Section 2, you deal with the appeal scheme, and section 3 of your evidence, starting at page 14, you deal with the policy context, and we'll take all those matters as read.
Yeah.
Before we move on to main issues and your assessment, there has been criticism made of your evidence in Mr. Morris's rebuttal proof of evidence regarding methodology. And the methodological criticism appears to be the fact that you haven't set out in your proof the breakdown for value, susceptibility, sensitivity, and magnitude of effects for all of the landscape and visual receptors. Your comment on that, please.
Yeah. So what I've followed the methodology that's set out in the LVIA. So broadly speaking, it can be kind of taken as read that I've used the same methodology as the LVIA. What I've done where I have split it down and given greater detail are those ones where I felt that was the most benefit to kind of understanding the thought process. So, excuse me, particularly those where there was a greater difference, if you like, between what the LVIA said and what I said, because I felt that was the one where understanding that more would be of most use. I'm kind of mindful that obviously my role here is as an expert to help you to kind of make up your mind as to the appeal rather than myself producing an LVIA, which is obviously what the Glivia guidance is targeted at, is people producing an LVIA, which isn't kind of what I'm doing.
Thank you. And then turning to section 4 of your evidence, which starts at page 18. Section 4.1, you provide your assessment of the impact of the scheme on openness of the greenbelt. Can I ask you to just summarise your view on the impact of the scheme on openness, particularly having regard to visual openness?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of touched on the fact that I feel there's two aspects, obviously, to openness. There's the sort of absence of built development, which I know will be covered by my colleague, but particularly the visual openness point is a mixture of a kind of spatial and visual impact to that, and it's around the extent to which you can see through and across the landscape. And while there's no doubt that hedgerows are obviously a feature of green belt landscapes, that what this proposal will be doing in a lot of areas is actually providing a kind of double hedgerow, for want of a better phrase, where there'll be a hedgerow either side of the public right of way. And that certainly isn't, the normal way you would subdivide two fields would be with a single hedgerow, not a double hedgerow. And obviously the impact of those double hedgerows, particularly at the 3 metre height that they need to be maintained at to provide the visual mitigation, is that you create this tunnel effect, which obviously some of the residents talked about this morning, these kind of long stretches with no break. And even when you might have sort of a country laneway where you have a hedge either side of it, very often there'll be gaps and breaks in that for field entrances and the like, which you don't have where you've got these long stretches of uninterrupted fencing and hedging either side of the public rights of way.
Thank you. And then the next point I'd like to pick up is in relation to landscape character. And you cover that in section 4.2 of your evidence, starting at page 19. Now, one of the key issues between the parties is the value and sensitivity of the Breachwood Green landscape character area. And you deal with that at paragraphs 4.2.11 on page 23. To 4.2.15.
Yeah.
And you identify that the landscape character area assessment itself indicates that the landscape is of a moderate to low value, but your view is that it has a moderate to high value and a moderate to high sensitivity. Can I ask you to summarize the basis for that view?
Yeah, sure. So obviously the LCA itself is a reasonably large area, so we're kind of focusing on the part of it that's within the study area for the scheme. So that, I think, to begin with, you automatically need to look at it at that finer grain, and obviously there will always be variations without sort of throughout the landscape character area as a whole. My view is that some of the negative impacts that are talked about, things like the impact of the airport, for example, are actually far less in reality when you're on site than perhaps you would think from reading those landscape character assessments. I note that the landscape character assessment is quite old now. It's based on an assessment done in 2002, so almost 25 years old. And I think that actually the kind of visual impact in particular of the airport on that part of the landscape character area is a lot less, and therefore it's sort of higher than the published landscape character assessment is suggesting. And I know that Landscape Partnership in their review of the LVIA agreed, I think they said moderate rather than moderate low. I've kind of gone a bit higher than that because actually I think that there is a lot of high quality features within the landscape. It shares a lot of features with the national landscape, which sort of lies further to the north, and the sort of undulating character of it in particular, I think, adds to the value of it. And obviously then factoring in susceptibility as well. The published landscape character assessment doesn't kind of consider, it talks about energy infrastructure, I think, but it's talking about pylons, and rather than looking at solar panels, I guess kind of solar farms that we see today aren't maybe something that was as commonplace when the original assessment was undertaken. So what I've sort of done is looked at the way it assesses things like open storage, because obviously we've got some buildings and structures here which are akin to shipping containers that you'd see in open storage. Also the way that it talks about open mining, I think, and extraction, because of the kind of fact that they're much larger spatial operations, which again are more akin to this kind of scale and expanse of the solar farm operations. So sort of when you read through those, I feel that assessing the susceptibility to a solar farm is actually kind of quite high, and that overall is why I've elevated it. And I think most of what I've set out in my proof is backed up again through the other document I cite, which is Landscape Partnership's assessment of the East Luton, or assessment of landscape looking at potential sites around the east of Luton, where in there they also talk about that kind of higher sensitivity towards development.
Thank you very much. And then moving on, in terms of the impact of the proposed development on the LCA, at paragraph 4.2.21 of your evidence, you explain that you believe there'd be a moderate to substantial adverse impact for the entire lifetime of the proposed development, so 0 to 40 years.
Yeah.
And then you explain that you think there's potential for a slight to moderate beneficial effect post decommissioning. Can you summarize, please, your views on those two conclusions?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, as I set out in 4.2.22, I think the scale of the development is obviously unsympathetic to the scale of the villages you've got there. There's an impact on public access to the LCA. I think the public rights of way will become less attractive. In fact, we heard that this morning, the fact they'll be less attractive through their enclosure. There's a number of areas where views in and out of the LCA will be blocked. So, for example, there's a couple of locations where views of the water tower will be lost, or views of the windmill will be lost. I think it will harm the sense of remoteness, and that is something that's cited in the landscape character area assessment as being a particular sort of feature of the landscape character area. And I think that the post decommissioning benefit, the reason I've said that it will be I think a slightly to moderate beneficial is really around the retained mitigation planting. Obviously, there's an assumption there that the rest of it's returned to agricultural land, which has an impact on the biodiversity aspect, but I've kind of looked at it from a purely landscape point of view.
Thank you. And then in relation to the site itself, as opposed to the landscape character area, it's a similar judgment that you've made. You say that it would be a moderate to substantial adverse effect on the site for the entire 40-year period, and then a moderate beneficial impact post decommissioning.
Yeah.
That's set out at paragraph 4.2.38 of your proof. Again, please summarize why you've come to that conclusion.
Yeah. So I think again, just touching on the post year 40, so obviously the benefits are realised through the full restoration to agricultural landscape, the retention of mitigation hedgerow and tree planting. There are some obviously uncharacteristic, I know that lots made of it kind of restoring hedgerow, which is listed as a characteristic feature, but actually again, that kind of double hedgerow point I was making before isn't necessarily a characteristic feature. So I think actually that in some ways detracts from the benefit that will come from the hedgerow being retained. And obviously during the use, there's going to be introduction of a lot of non-rural uses into the landscape character area, which will become kind of incongruent features within the landscape character area.
Thank you very much. Was there anything else you wanted to say in relation to impact on landscape character?
Don't think so, no.
Okay, let's turn then to visual effects. This is covered at paragraphs 4.2.48 to 4.2.78 of your proof and your rebuttal, where you assess Mr. Morris's LM1 to LM5 viewpoints.
Yeah.
Now, plainly, the points of difference between your assessment and Mr. Morris's assessment are numerous, and I'm not going to ask you to turn up every single viewpoint. Otherwise, we'd be here all day. But what I'd like to do is focus on 3 on-site viewpoints and 3 off-site viewpoints to give the inspector an idea of the sorts of effects that the scheme will have.
Yeah.
So in relation to the on-site viewpoints, could we please turn up Mr. Morris's LM2? That's in his appendix LM1.
Yeah. Yes.
Ma'am, are you working from the online version? I think it's PDF 77.
It's page 19 of the appendix. Well, it's panorama, sorry. So it goes across, it's 19, 20, 21, and 22.
Which document are you in, Mr. Reynolds?
11.1.3 landscape appendix.
I'm at the viewpoint, it's at the images of the viewpoint itself, which is much later in the document.
Oh, right. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. So that's the figure LM5053.
Yes, I think PDF page 77 is correct.
Yeah.
That the one with the windmill? Get LMO.
Yeah, it's very confusing. Yeah, that the image with the windmill is viewpoint 1, and then the figure numbers confuse things substantially. If you look below the image of the windmill, it's viewpoint LM2 part 1.
Yeah. There's
of
four in 4 parts.
Yes.
Is everybody where they need to be? Okay. um, the first person to try and turn up a viewpoint was always going to have difficulty, I think. Okay, viewpoint LM2. Could you please just situate the inspector in terms of where that viewpoint is? And ma'am, it might be helpful to look up LM.03, which is also in Mr. Morris's appendix. LM.03, the location, it's in Mr. Morse, it's in CD 11.1.3. Just bear with me, ma'am, whilst I find the 62. Thank you.
Mom, I'm just wondering, because we're flicking between plans and photographs in the same document, whether if there's a hard copy, you could keep the viewpoint plan open to orientate yourself. And then look at the view. Hopefully that's in one of the boxes around the room.
Yeah, I think that's that one.
Yeah.
That's
With the viewpoints. Have you got the viewpoints on it, marked on it? Yes, okay. Fine. I mean, I think in any event, it may be helpful for a hard copy to be produced for the inspector. Fine. Okay. Viewpoint LM2. Now, Mr. Reynolds, should the inspector be looking at the green 2 or the pink 2 in that plan?
so it's the green 2 that's up near the windmill between fields 16 and 17.
Are you there? And this is a viewpoint in respect of which you've identified substantial adverse effects, both
Yes.
at construction and throughout the period of the development. Could you assist, just looking at the part 1 of 4, given that this is a panoramic view, just assist with in what direction is that looking?
Yeah, sure. So the first image is looking broadly southwest. So sort of with your back to the windmill, effectively. You can see the public right of way sort of crossing the field in front of you, passing to the right of that tree. The viewpoint is just north of, I don't know whether you've got the enhanced mitigation scheme drawing to plan, but you'll see there's a kind of solitary tree between field 16 and 17, about halfway along. That's the tree that's just poking into view on the left-hand side of that image. So you're sort of looking down towards the group of trees.
If it helps, I did walk along there yesterday, so
Okay, great. Yeah.
Thank you. And the impact of the proposal on that particular view, Mr. Reynolds, can you explain what you think it would look like?
Sure. So broadly speaking, what you'll be seeing in that view is fields of solar panels to the left and right of the footpath, the public right of way. The original LVA scheme proposed a hedgerow to screen those along the right-hand side of the public right of way, but not on the left-hand side. The enhanced mitigation scheme is now proposing additional hedgerow on the left-hand side of that public right of way. So effectively, in the early years construction, in the early years, you'll see fields of solar panels either side of the path with the fencing, and then obviously as the hedgerow matures, that will change to being a 3-meter high hedgerow on either side of the footpath, which will screen the fields of panels.
Thank you. And then part 2 of 4, where is that?
So part 2 is kind of looking to the side effectively, so that's out across field 17, and so that will effectively be a field that's got solar panels in it, and again with a hedgerow between you and the field, which will obviously grow over the lifetime of the development to screen it, so ultimately that view will be blocked by the 3-meter high hedgerow.
Thank you. And then part 3 of 4.
So that's looking northeast now, so we're sort of focused back towards the windmill. So broadly speaking, similar to the first frame, so you'll have panels on either side of the left and right of the footpath, with the hedgerow running along either side of the path to screen those fields, which will obviously mature over time.
And what impact, if any, would the solar panels and the mitigation planting have on views of the windmill from the footpath?
So from that location, you will lose the view of the windmill. You'll also lose those sort of onward views to the middle and longer distance that you can see where you've sort of got the fold in the landscape there. You've got more distant views at that location, and they'll all be blocked by the 3-meter high hedgerow.
Thank you. And then finally turning to part 4 of 4.
So that's sort of facing across field 16, basically. So again, that will be a field of solar panels that run up across the full width of that field, as you can see it there. And then the enhanced mitigation scheme is proposing a hedgerow between the viewer point and the field of solar panels.
Thank you. And then moving on to our next viewpoint, that will be LM5. So we're in the same document. Everyone will be pleased to hear. And it's page 85.
Yeah.
Now, first things first, please, by reference to this plan, explain where this viewpoint is taken from.
This is green number 5. So we are in the southwest corner of the site. We're on the public right of way between fields 1 and 2.
And your assessment is that there will be moderate to substantial adverse effects at the outset of the development and moderate adverse effects in years 10 to 40 from this particular viewpoint.
That's correct. Yes. So just to say, I think there's an error with the finder bit at the bottom because it doesn't move. So so the first frame is effectively the left frame, not the right frame. But so at that point, you're kind of looking broadly across field 2. So in that view, there won't be any solar panels. However, there are structures associated with the solar farm within field 2, which will be sort of broadly in the center of that initial photograph, although there's screening proposed to go around those. So that will be something that's seen obviously in the initial years while the screening matures. And then when you move on to part 2 of that view, you're now sort of looking more across to the northeast. So what you're seeing in the distance there are field 7, 6, field 5, and in particular, you're getting views of the construction compound. So the trees that are sort of central in that photograph are the trees that are immediately adjacent to the construction compound. So that will be quite prominent in that view in that construction phase, which is why I've assessed that as being a higher level than years 0 to 10 to take into account the construction compound presence. And what you will do is the screening that's proposed to screen those fields 6 and 7 will also mean that you lose the view of Tankard Farm and the listed buildings at Tankard Farm, which you can see sort of pretty much in the center of that frame.
Thank you very much. And our final on-site viewpoint, that will be viewpoint 8. So we're now moving away from Mr. Morris's rebuttal and into CD 1.20. And it should be PDF page 5 of 10.
Yeah.
Actually, the first it starts on page 4. The winter view is taken at page 4.
Yeah.
Have you managed to find it, ma'am? Yeah. Oh, good. Okay. So the same initial question. Where is that?
So that is pink number 8 on the plan, which is about halfway along the southeastern side of the site near Darley Hall. It's taken from the public right of way just as you go into the site to the immediate north of the woodland, so immediately adjacent to field 9, sort of probably roughly at the junction of field 9 and field 10, somewhere around there. You can see the you're sort of underneath the overhead cables, which are shown on the enhanced mitigation strategy drawing, just to kind of help you with your bearings a little bit.
Thank you. And in terms of your assessment, you assess impacts on this viewpoint and viewpoint 2 taken together, because that's the approach that the LVIA originally took. And you've assessed the impacts would be substantial, adverse, from construction right through to the end of the operation of the development.
Yes.
Can you assist in just explaining, first of all, what would be seen on either side of the footpath in this view?
Yeah, sure. So effectively on the right hand side of the footpath you'll have panels. You've got field 9 immediately adjacent, and then field 10. On the left hand side there are no panels in the kind of immediate foreground of the site, but you will have field 5 and field 6 and field 7, kind of in the more distant views as you sort of run along roughly along the left hand side of the path, or the pylons is a good way of marking them. So what you'll have in the immediate right hand side is there's currently no planting proposed, so there'll be nothing to screen users along that part of the footpath from field 9. So you'll see the panels there for the entire duration of the 40 years, and then you will have a hedgerow on the right hand side which will screen fields 10 and 11 in part from that view, but it will also again block the views towards Tankers Farm in the middle.
Thank you. And I wonder if you might just take up the enhanced mitigation strategy, and
Yeah.
I'd like you to imagine that you are a footpath user standing at that viewpoint 8, and you decide that you'd like to walk up to the windmill. Can you please explain the experience of walking from viewpoint 8 to the windmill in terms of how the proposed scheme would look and be experienced?
Yeah, sure. So as you start to walk along, as I mentioned, you'll have panels of solar panels on the right hand side. You'll then sort of turn right and pass along between fields 10 and 11. So you'll have a 3-meter hedgerow on the left to screen field 10, but there's no screening of field 9 to your right. You'll then continue with no screening of field 8. You then sort of do a bit of a left-right turn. At that point you will have an area where there's hedgerow all around you, so you've got sort of hedgerow to your left, to your right as you make those moves, which will be managed at 3 meters in height. As you walk up past field 14, you'll have the LVIA hedgerow on your left hand side to screen field 14. The enhanced mitigation strategy planting will then be on your right hand side, blocking any views out to the east. And then as you continue on up, you'll have the same thing. So you'll have hedgerow planting on both sides of you, which will screen the views between fields 16 and 17.
Thank you. Anything else that you'd like to say in relation to on-site visual effects?
No, not really, other than just, for the majority of the public right routes, you'll go from what are effectively open, expansive views, in many cases quite long distant views, to being fully enclosed in these sort of tunnels as you walk along, where the only visibility you've got is immediately in front or behind. And I think that the residents this morning kind of emphasised the impact that will have on them as regular users of these public rights of way.
Thank you. Turning then to off-site viewpoints. So again, we'll look at 3. Please, can we look at viewpoint 6 first? So that is in CD 1.19. And I think you also need to look at CD 1.21. CD 1.21 has the photo montages of viewpoint 6.
Yeah.
So dealing firstly with CD 1.19, it should be the last photographs in the document. I believe it's the last 4 showing winter and summer views. Now, first of all, just help the inspector with where viewpoint 6 is taken from.
So viewpoint 6 is effectively the southernmost point of the site, or the main site, sort of where you've got the rounded edge of field 3 in front of you. So that's sort of looking through across field 3, field 4 with the woodland block, Barley-woods sort of in the middle of the photograph. Also, just to note that that is at that point you are on the Chiltern Way, because the Chiltern Way runs along, it runs across the fields and then it runs along the road at that point.
Thank you. And just for the inspector's note, in respect of this particular viewpoint, you identify the effects as being substantial adverse in the construction period in years 0 to 10, and then moderate adverse in years 10 to 40. Now, if we turn up the photo montages at CD 1.21,
Yeah.
can I ask you just to explain the basis for your view?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what the photo montages show quite clearly is obviously in that initial early years of it, you clearly see the panels, you see the fencing. I think there's a column there with a CCTV and safety lighting, etc. on it. I think noticeable is not just that you can see the panels, but that they completely block the view of what was there behind sort of where they are. So you lose those views across. You can just see the existing cottage sort of poking up on the left hand side, slightly above it. And then while the hedgerow grows and matures, you still get, as again, I think one of the residents talked about this morning, you know, you'll still get some views through the hedgerow. It won't entirely screen it, particularly not in winter when it's not in leaf. So you're always going to be aware of the presence of the panels, and also the hedgerow in itself will block out any kind of remaining views that you get across the landscape at that location.
Thank you. And then the next viewpoint is just continuing along the Chiltern Way, and it's LM4. So we're back into Mr. Morris's rebuttal document. I think it's PDF 83.
Yeah.
And this is a receptor in respect of which you identify slight to moderate adverse effects at the construction phase and slight adverse effects in years 10 to 40. First of all, just assist with where exactly this is taken from.
So yeah, this is also on the Chiltern Way. This is kind of off-site, just slightly to the southeast, I suppose to the right of the viewpoint 6 we were just looking at.
And in terms of the solar panels, what, if anything, do you think the user of this public footpath would see?
Certainly in the early years, you'll probably have some visibility of the panels in field 3, which are the ones we were just looking at, which will be in the kind of immediate foreground of the view as you're looking there. You also will probably be aware of them on the right hand side of that view, which will be the sort of panels in field 5. They'll be slightly more distant, but as you can see, as is labelled on there, the water tower at T Green. So if you sort of draw a line from this viewpoint across to the water tower at T Green, you'll see that you'll be looking across fields 5 and I think probably the corner of field 12 as well. So in those early years, you're likely to see panels in those fields. Obviously, once the hedgerow has grown, you probably won't see the panels, but you will also lose things like the visibility of the water tower as a result of that screening in the foreground.
Thank you very much. And then finally, in terms of viewpoints, can we please look at viewpoint 5? And that is at CD 1.21.
Yeah.
Which provides a photo montage. should be page 3 of the PDF. So again, just explain where exactly this viewpoint is taken from.
Yeah, so this is one of the sort of most distant ones from the site. So we're up in the north here. So this is the kind of northeast of the site on the public right of way.
Thank you. And in relation to a receptor group, including this viewpoint and viewpoint 4, you identify the effects as being slight to moderate adverse up to year 10, and then slight adverse at years 10 to 40. So can you assist, please, in what the impact will be for users of this footpath of the development?
Yeah, so obviously in the baseline, there's kind of no detracting or industrial features or anything in this particular view, and then what you will see in the center of the view, certainly obviously in the early years, and I think from this distance, probably because of the way the levels and the landform works, the hedgerow won't screen it, is you'll see panels in the center, sort of in amongst that cluster of trees in the middle. You'll see some panels that appear on the hedgerow for that. It's quite useful, I think, with the PDF. You can flick between them and you sort of see them appear and disappear. It's quite good.
Thank you very much. And then before we move away from visual effects, you talk about post-decommissioning visual effects in your proof of evidence and your rebuttal. And in relation to your assessment of specific viewpoints or receptors, your assessment of the post-decommissioning stage in terms of visual effects is either neutral, or on certain public rights of way, it's between negligible and substantial adverse. So just in general terms, explain why you've taken that particular view.
Yeah, so the basic approach that that I've taken to come to that view is where you're on a footpath, where at the moment you'll have these kind of open expansive views across the countryside. Obviously, once the panels are decommissioned, those hedgerows that block those views will remain in place. So considered against the baseline, there'll still be that visual harm. There's a lot of views, so that distant view across, for example, to the water tower at T Green won't come back. Those views where I sort of talked about the views towards the heritage buildings at Tankers Farm, obviously they will continue to be lost. So from that point of view, I sort of think there will be continue to be an adverse effect of greater or less degree. For the rest of them, I've said neutral because my experience is, while we can talk about the benefit, as I did previously, in terms of landscape effect of hedgerow being retained, from a visual point of view, it doesn't really make much difference. I think nobody's going to stand at a viewpoint today, look out and think this is a lovely countryside view, if only there was a bit more hedgerow. So I think in 40 years time, when you look out and you have that view, with all the panels gone but with extra hedgerow, it will be different, but it won't be better or worse. It will just be a different countryside view. There'll be some more hedgerow in it than there was before, and I don't think it will make it either way. And that's why I've gone for the neutral rather than a negligible, because to me negligible means there's a small change one way or another. I'm saying it's absolutely neutral. It won't be better, it won't be worse.
Good, thank you. And then moving away from viewpoints, going back to your proof of evidence.
Yeah.
Just a few points on cumulative impacts. This is at paragraph 4.2.79, page 37 of your proof, and it runs up to 4.2.89 on page 40.
Yeah.
So one of the points that you make is that you consider there to be an increased cumulative impact on the Breachwood Green landscape character area arising from in combination development of the east of Luton allocated housing site and the appeal site. Could you summarise why you think that would be the case?
Yeah, so essentially I've said that it will be a landscape effect rather than a visual one. That is because it sits within the same landscape character area, so it sits within the Breachwood Green Ridge character area. It will remove another section of it. I think actually the plan that was that was shown this morning of the kind of the three schemes was quite useful to show the extent of it that gets taken out by the allocations. And when you overlay that with the character area plan, what you end up with is actually a very small sort of fragment of the landscape character area to the very north, and then you have east of Luton, and then you have the appeal scheme. So what it will effectively do is isolate that one small character area at the very northern end. That's also the point at which you're getting up towards the national landscape. So I think the kind of impact of those two schemes in reducing all of that character area and effectively curtailing it and leaving a small pocket isolated will have an adverse impact that will be worse in that cumulative scenario.
Thank you. And then you also talk about in relation to, so leave aside the east of Luton housing development, you talk about the Luton Airport Development Consent Order, and you raise the prospect of there being increased negative visual amenity impacts as a consequence of the off-site mitigation works for Luton Airport. Please just explain why you consider there might be a cumulative harm arising.
Yeah, so the majority of the airport works that occur both immediately adjacent to and within, in fact, the red line for the appeal scheme are effectively off-site biodiversity enhancement, and quite a lot of that is hedgerow planting. So even in some of the locations where the appeal scheme isn't proposing new hedgerow and you may not get a tunnelling effect, the airport will effectively be increasing hedgerow, so it will add more footpaths to that kind of to the number that are enclosed, and you get the tunnelling impact. So I think in combination there is likely to be an increase in the visual impact as a result of the two schemes.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Mr. Reynolds?
No, don't think so.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I will. I have a list of documents. I may not last an hour. I might have to break sooner if that's all right, please, Mum. But yes, sorry, that came to a rather abrupt end, and I need to give you a list of documents, so bear with me. So the documents you will need are CD 7.16 and 7.18. Oh, I'd have to recollect which ones you had open in the first place. No, but you will need CD 1.17. Yeah. Oh, which ones have you got, Mr. Sharp?
CDs, I think, CDs 117 to 123, and then the version, so extending boxes, visualizations, point, something point two, so stuff like those over. Yeah.
Just in case, yeah.
So I'm not going to dwell extensively on the visualization, so I think you can probably put them away so far as they relate to the core document 1 series. Core document 2.2.17. Yes. Which is the biodiversity and landscaping plan. CD 3.1.1, which is the officer report. Six 6.2.3, which is MPS EN3, which you may not need to get out. I'm sure you'll be familiar with the proposition. Core document 1.32, which is technical appendices to the ES. CD 4.1, development plan. CD 6.5.1, which is the landscape character study. CD 5. Forgive me, 6.5.12, which is the East of Luton landscape report. Inquiry document 1, the tables. CD 5.1.4, which is the Harlow Road decision. This is a gift that keeps on giving, isn't it? The EM 5.1.4, Harlow Road decision. The enhanced mitigation strategy, which you probably already got open, and then we'll leave the joy of the Luton DCO examination report and decision letter, I think, until we get there. So we don't want to break the systems, but that should be all for the moment. Did you manage to get all of those, Mr.?
No, I'll open them as we go along.
You'll open them. Fine, good. Well, let's crack on then. And hello to you, Mr. Reynolds. Now, you were instructed, of course, following the council's refusal of the scheme contrary to officer recommendation.
Yes.
And part of the officer's consideration of the matter concerned the landscape character and visual impacts of the scheme.
Yes.
Including cumulative impacts.
Yep.
And impacts on greenbelt openness.
Yep.
And of course, when the scheme was determined, greybelt wasn't a concept with which we were familiar.
No.
So the recommendation was based on the fact that this was a site within the greenbelt and therefore required to be justified by the benefits such that very special circumstances were established.
Mm-hmm.
The officer was assisted in her recommendation, wasn't she, by the Landscape Partnership, who produced essentially consultation responses to assist the council in their determination of the application. And those are at CD 716 and CD 718. And CD 16, if we go there first.
Yeah.
That was based, wasn't it, on the original layout?
Correct, yes.
So that essentially the first layout, which included a greater area that was covered in panels.
Yes.
And if the inspector wants to understand, gosh, and I think I may have just fallen at the first hurdle, that plan's at core document 155. To understand what that was commenting on. And I don't think that's one that I flagged actually, but there we go. 155. It's probably worth just opening that to have a look at what the Landscape Partnership were commenting on at that time and doing a compare and contrast with the enhanced mitigation strategy, and we can see where panels have been removed, primarily fields 1, 2, 18, 19, 4, and an expansion of panels into the northern corner of field 8.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what the first comment was responding to from the landscape partnership. And then there were changes to the scheme, and we can see in various places the chronology of the amendments that were made to the scheme, but changes were made to respond to the landscape partnership's observations. And then we get another consultation response at core document 718, which is in March 2024. Yeah?
Correct.
And the changes that were made between the first iteration of the scheme, to which core document 716 responds, and those which core document 718 responds are material changes, aren't they?
Yes.
And they are material changes that improve the scheme from a landscape and visual perspective.
Yeah, they reduce the impact.
Yeah. And if we want to know what core document 718 is responding to, we go into core document 2 series, because that's the amended proposals. 3 rounds of revision, essentially 28th of November, 12th of February 24, and 24th of April 24. And the plan that was being considered at that time is core document 2.2.17.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those changes are summarised within core document 718, which is the landscape partnership's response, at page 5 of 36, under the heading the revised scheme. So core document 718, we've got chapter 2, part 2, which starts on page 5, and that outlines the summary of key changes affecting landscape impact. Do you see that?
I do, yeah.
And essentially what we've got is a change in the location of the construction compound, removal of panels from fields 1, 2, 4, 18 and 19.
Yep.
Change of arrangement in field 3. The height of the panels reduced by 1 metre for the first 12 rows. In fields 6 and 7, arrays have been set back to provide a wider buffer against Wandon End. The addition of panels to field 8, that we can see when we look at the EMS, and a host of additional planting, mitigation and open space provision. Yeah?
Yeah. And
it's fair to observe, isn't it, that the landscape partnership were positive about many of those amendments made?
They were positive about the changes, although they did continue to have concerns about the scheme.
Yeah. And I think you record in your proof 2.3.13 that the term uses that they were welcomed by the landscape partnership, those changes which had been made. And whereas the landscape partnership had previously considered the scheme would cause what they called unacceptable harm to the local landscape character, that was not a conclusion it maintained in the later review, was it?
Don't think they used that term, no.
No, they used it in the first one, CD 7.16, but they don't use it in the later response to it.
No.
And when we go to the conclusions of CD 718, at section 5, that begins, section 6, forgive me, page 28 of 36. We can see at 6.1.3 what is said there is that the revised scheme has responded to the sensitivity of the landscape setting, omitting array fields from the most visually prominent areas. Other fields have been reduced in size to provide a greater intervening buffer space between the panels and the roadside boundary. The height of panels in field 3 has been reduced by 1 metre to reduce the visual impact close to the Chiltern Way. 6.1.4 TLCP supports the changes made and considers they will noticeably reduce the landscape and visual effects of the proposal. 6.1.5, in that paragraph, the Landscape Partnership considered that there would still be substantial visual harm, and that would be particularly in the early years of operation.
Mhm.
But when we look down to 6.1.6, we see that the commentary from this response is that the landscape proposals provide comprehensive treatments to help mitigate the effect of the panels, with new hedges to create greenways, tree planting to aid the screening and filtering of views, and enhanced ecological connectivity. You see that?
Yeah.
And the response also regarded as a notable benefit that extensive areas of grassland were proposed that would bring about ecological and amenity benefits, didn't it?
Yeah.
Just while we're here, to pick up at 6.1.10 on page 29 of the PDF, that dealt with cumulative effects. You see that?
Sorry, which paragraph was that?
6.1.10.
Yes.
And that's essentially dealing with the two issues we're concerned with: the east of Luton, that's how I'll describe the development that's allocated in the plan jointly, and the airport. And what the Landscape Partnership said there was that in terms of cumulative impact, the LVIA raises the issue of the settlements at the Heath and Tea Green will be affected by both the solar farm proposals and the proposed extension to Luton Airport. The planned housing at Stubbox will bring urbanising change to the vicinity of the solar farm, but subject to a sympathetic design, is not considered by TLP to bring about a cumulative impact with the proposal. You see that?
I do, yeah.
And the officer essentially, in her assessment of cumulative impacts and recommendation to the committee, adopted the same stance. Cumulative impacts are acceptable. Yeah. And when we go down...
Sorry, just say, I don't know whether cumulative impacts are acceptable. They said that they don't believe there are cumulative impacts, the proposal.
Yeah. The Landscape Partnership or the officer?
The Landscape Partnership said it's not considered by TLP to bring about a cumulative impact with the proposal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's not the same as saying we acknowledge there is a cumulative impact, but it's acceptable.
Yeah.
They're saying we don't think there is one.
So TLP didn't think there was one.
No.
The officer commented on the cumulative impacts, but didn't raise that.
On that advice from
Based
TLP.
on that advice,
Yeah.
didn't raise an objection to the scheme.
No, but I wouldn't agree with that as for the reasons I set out.
Yeah,
previously.
and we'll come to that. But right at the end, so there's some way to go yet. At 6.1.13, it's worth reading that in full, because what the Landscape Partnership said there was that the reduced extent of the proposed solar farm to 45 hectares should result in a reduced landscape and visual effect in the medium to long term. The landscape mitigation is considered to be substantive and appropriate to the scale of the development. There is still concern about the capacity of the landscape to accommodate the change in land use, as solar panels will exert an industrial character and detract from the open farmland character currently experienced. But in TLP's view, the revised scheme has responded to the principal concerns raised at the application stage. So it's clear, isn't it, that the concerns that TLP had, although they weren't completely addressed by the revisions to the scheme, have at least to some extent, or had at least to some extent, been addressed.
Yeah, it's their concerns, which aren't the concerns that I have.
Yeah. But in terms of TLP's approach, they were advising the council. They are a respected consultancy registered with the Landscape Institute, yes. They are competent to give expert advice on landscape and visual matters, agreed. And we agree, don't we, that that assessment provided over those two reports in response to the scheme and the amendments to it carry weight in this appeal. It's something that the inspector can put weight on.
Yes, but I think the important aspect is to note that that's the advice that the officer took, and the officer, as we know, made a recommendation that should be approved. Members disagreed. I'm here to assist the inspector as to why member's position was a reasonable one to take. I think that when you read through it, it is worth reading through the whole section. I would say, because there's a number of concerns that they retain. Although, as you say, they do address they do say that a number of them have been dealt with. I think probably I would say the most fundamental difference is they don't have issue with this tunneling effect. So they set out that they don't think that there's any harm, visual harm, from the public rights of way being enclosed by 3 to 3.5 metre hedgerow on either side. And that's a difference of professional opinion between whoever at Landscape Partnership undertook that review and myself. My personal view is that that is an area of significant harm arises from, and I think that's why they don't they say that effectively it's dealt with their main concerns.
Yeah, and we're going to come to have a look at that, what you call the tunnelling effect, in due course. But it's right, isn't it? There's a range of evidence before the inspector. And where professionals have looked both at the landscape character area, but also of this site, also have looked at this site, that evidence is evidence, of course, that the inspector will have to have regard to.
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
draw her own conclusions.
Yeah. But what I'm putting to you, Mr. Reynolds, and I don't see that you depart from the proposition I'm putting, is that the Landscape Partnership, as a company competent to give expert advice on these matters, have produced a document upon which this inspector can put weight.
I think you can give weight to what they say. However, there are differences of professional judgment, and I set out what my view is, and it differs from what Landscape Partnership's view is.
Yeah. And of course, we know that response informed the officer report, which is core document 3.1.1, compiled by Sarah Sparian, who's in the room, or what she is in the room still. I can see her over there. And she's a senior planning officer with responsibility for major projects, yes?
Yes.
So within that report, 3.1.1, if we go to page 46 of 79, or do a search for 4.10.52, that's the summary and conclusions on landscape and visual matters that's set out there.
Yeah.
Do you have that in front of you?
Yep.
Mom, do you have that in front of you?
Yeah.
So summary and conclusions of the landscape and visual part, which starts earlier and ends by talking about the TLP consultation response. And what's said at 4.10.52 is, taking all the above assessments and advice, officers consider that the proposal, by virtue of its scale and nature, would result in inevitable adverse landscape and visual impacts, mostly of a moderate to significant nature, and in the construction period and in the shorter term, while mitigation establishes. You see that?
Yep.
That point on inevitability of impacts is something that's set out in national policy in relation to solar farms, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, we can see that it's EN3, core document 6.2.3 in paragraph 2.10.17. And we can agree, can't we, Mr. Reynolds, that harmful impacts of a scheme do not make a scheme unacceptable. That's a matter for the planning balance.
Correct.
But as a general principle, one should avoid, where possible, siting solar farms in the most sensitive and most valued landscapes.
Correct.
And those most sensitive and most valued landscapes would be nationally and locally designated landscapes.
Yes.
This site isn't that.
It's not designated, no.
No. Cast your eye down then within the officer report, 3.1.1, to paragraph 4.10.54. So
Yeah.
4.10.54. So next page over. And what the officer says there, still in the summary and conclusion section, is the proposed development has been designed so as to minimise its adverse landscape impact, while still delivering a solar farm that would contribute up to 49.9 megawatts of green energy by removing fields of panels from the original submission and locating remaining panels as sensitively as possible. The officer here accepted there would be landscape and visual harm arising from the scheme, but observed that it had been sensitively cited as a result of the amendments made in the application process, yes?
Yes, I think that was specifically because a number of the panels that were removed were those that were closest to residential properties.
Yeah. And that was done essentially in response to observations from the council, particularly the landscape partnership.
Yes.
And then 4.10.55. So just next paragraph down, the officer said this, that the proposed mitigation would deliver some visual and landscape benefits together with some biodiversity improvements to the local environment, particularly in the medium to long term. The 40-year lifetime of the scheme is a significant period. Following decommissioning of the solar farm, there would be no residual adverse landscape effects. When all panels and battery and inverter equipment have been removed, there may also be benefits to the landscape biodiversity and soil quality in the longer term from the mitigation used while the solar farm is in operation, including what should be established hedgerows and woodland, reinstating some former field boundaries. And that led the officer to the conclusion set out at 4.1056 at the end of this section, that there would be a conflict with the local plan policies, but overall it's considered the total visual and landscape harm would be moderate in weight in the planning balance, with moderate benefits arising in the later stages and post decommissioning. You see that. And that was, of course, a balance that the officer was entitled to reach based on the evidence in front of her.
Correct.
And her own professional judgment.
Yeah, her own professional judgment in terms of the balancing and the planning balance exercise. Obviously, she takes the professional judgment in terms of landscape and visual impacts from the landscape partnership.
Yeah, in the same way that this inspector will take the professional views that you've expressed, that Mr. Morris expressed, and that taken from all of the character assessments as well. But you don't make any criticism of the officer in the conclusions she arrived at on landscape impact as one that was not open to her, or one that was not reasonably open to her. That's not a point you make.
That was a reasonable conclusion to draw based on what was in the landscape partnership report. But as I said, there are parts of the landscape partnership report I agree with and parts that I don't agree with.
Now, in carrying out your assessment of the scheme, you adopt the methodology contained within the LVIA. You say that in your proof. You've repeated it today. So let's just identify, please, where that methodology is. We've got core document 132. So core document 132 is technical appendix C on landscape and visual effects. And the methodology essentially setting out the way in which the assessments carried out based on the guidelines for landscape and visual impact assessment. And I've seen a few purple books around the room today. But that's the document with which we're concerned that essentially sets the framework for the methodology that's set out here.
Yes. Yeah.
And that also has to be understood. So that sets out essentially the textual methodology. But we have a number of other components of the methodology within core document 1.17. So core document 117 is part of the landscape and visual impact assessment, again within the LVIA. And we can see the different figures set out. If you scroll down to page 62 of 71, those figures are all relevant to interpreting the methodology.
They are, yeah. I would say that's a useful summary of the methodology on those, how many, 6 pages, 7 pages?
Yeah. And it essentially starts with landscape.
Yep.
And it does the same for visual. And what it's telling us is how to approach the building blocks of overall effects.
Yes.
So we've got value and susceptibility, which we know we combine together to give sensitivity.
Yep.
And the landscape examples are given on, or landscape character examples are given on page 62.
Yep.
And then we think about the magnitude of effect, and that's what gives us our overall effect. And then it repeats the same exercise for visual.
Yep.
And you haven't taken any issue with that methodology. In fact, you've
No.
used it in your assessment.
I have, yeah.
Yeah. And neither did the council at
No.
any stage through the application
No.
process. It is a GLVIA compliant methodology.
It is.
And at the time that was put forward, it was, of course, used as part of the environmental statement because one was put forward voluntarily by the appellant.
Yes.
And the purpose of a methodology, whether we're talking about environmental impact assessment or a normal planning application outside of the EIA regime, the purpose of the methodology is to provide a transparent framework within which professional judgment can be exercised.
Yes, it's to set out the approach that was taken to the assessment so that someone else can then undertake a review of the assessment and understand how the conclusions were reached.
Exactly it. It's to allow a reader of the assessment to understand the different components of the judgment that have been arrived at in a clear and transparent way so that they understand how the overall effect has been reached.
Yeah.
Agreed? Okay. So just focusing in on some of the figures that we've got. Figure 6.3 is on page 64.
Yeah.
So this is, we're in the landscape character bit, but it doesn't much matter because it's reflected when we come to visual, but let's think about it in the landscape context. And Mum, you should see a lovely teal hue in figure 6.3, which is the degree of effect matrix. And what we can see there is, as we're all familiar with, combining the sensitivity of a receptor with a magnitude of effect gives us an overall effect. And we have different stages ranging from the very substantial to the negligible. Yeah. There's not a no effect in this particular methodology, but what you can have is very substantial all the way to negligible and every step in between. So negligible to slight, slight to moderate, and so on. Yes?
Yeah.
Same for visual receptors, but that's on page 67. Now, just thinking about the level of effects that we've got here from the top of the tree to the very bottom, in this case, you don't identify any effects to landscape character at substantial or above, do you?
So double check on them all. I don't think so. Just double check the tables. No, I think the highest are the site and LCA 202, which are moderate to substantial.
Yeah. So above that would be substantial, substantial to very substantial, and very substantial at the top of the tree.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and I think we can agree across all landscape and visual receptors, you don't put anything at very substantial.
Don't think so.
Nothing reaches the top of that effect hierarchy, as it were.
Not on landscape, no.
Or visual effects. You don't identify very substantial visual effects either.
No, I don't think I do.
No. Because in respect to visual effects, the highest that you identify, so far as I can see, and do tell me if I'm wrong, that's not a trick question, Mr. Reynolds, but I think it's substantial adverse.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, above that is substantial to very substantial, and above that again would be very substantial, but you don't get up that.
So I've
dizzying
substantial. I don't have any very substantial. No.
No. Now, what the ES did within this methodology was that it considered significance, and happily we're on the right page for that, because if you scroll down below our teal graph, you'll see at the bottom of the page the heading significance.
Yeah.
And what is said there is if the degree of effect is moderate or above, then the effect is considered to be significant. Do you see that?
I do.
And that's usual practice for an environmental statement, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
to identify moderate and above. And identifying significant environmental effects is, of course, a key part of environmental impact assessment, isn't it?
It's the main difference between an EIA and a non-EIA LVIA assessment.
Yeah, that's really helpful because that's exactly right. The point being that a local authority, when deciding whether to grant planning permission for a project which is likely to have significant effects on the environment within the EIA regulations, can only do so in full knowledge of the likely significant effects and taking that into account in the decision-making process. So
Yes,
that's a
which is
crucial
why you would
component.
normally do a screening and scoping exercise.
Yeah. And in fact, we know that when the local planning authority considered the question of whether or not this development was EIA development, that is, whether it meets the relevant threshold in Schedule 2 and is likely to have significant effects on the environment, it decided that it didn't reach that threshold.
That's my understanding, yes.
Yeah.
Although, obviously, the applicant thought it would, because I can't believe they'd have gone to the cost of doing an LVIA ES if they didn't think it was necessary. So.
Well, if they did, and I wasn't involved in that stage, Mr. Reynolds, and they're happily proven wrong. But when you've assessed the effects in your evidence, you consider anything that is slight to moderate to be significant.
Yeah, because that's what the LVIA does.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's just think about that. First of all, and I understand the point, but we agree, don't we, that significance set out in the methodology that we've looked at CD 1.17 is a more usual approach to significance in.
Totally agree. I was very surprised that that's the way they did it, but because I wanted to, in my proof, obviously I didn't at that time have the benefit of Mr. Morris's kind of own assessment. So I based mine on a review of the LVIA, and the LVIA clearly said anything that effectively had the word moderate in it, even if it was effectively the under moderate, it said that it was significant.
Yeah, but that's not an approach that you would adopt in your own work.
No, but it's the approach the LVIA took, and I took the same approach as the LVIA.
Trying to be faithful to the methodology.
Following what the LVIA said, yeah.
So let's explore what you mean by significance in the context where EIA development or where the development is not EIA development. First of all, the identification of a significant adverse effect is not a bar to the grant of planning permission, is it?
No.
Are you saying that those effects which you've identified as significant are the most important effects for the inspector to have regard to in the decision-making process?
So they're the most important, I think, is a tricky way of putting it. Clearly, they are the most significant because they're identified as that. I don't know that means they're necessarily the most important. I think everything's of equal importance, really.
Right. So where you've identified a slight to moderate impact on a landscape character area or a visual receptor, that's as important as a substantial finding, is it? Which one is more likely to be determinative of the harm to landscape and visual impact?
Well, obviously, if the higher the assessment, so those that are significant are more likely to be more harmful. But you need to look at it in the round, I would suggest.
And regardless of the labelling of an effect, whether you call it significant or not, and we might try and save the inspector some work here, it's the substantive nature of the effect rather than the way in which it's labelled, which is important. Do we agree with that?
I agree, yeah.
Okay. And an effect that is labelled a significant effect, whether it's EIA development or not, is not necessarily something that attracts significant weight in the planning balance. Do we agree?
I agree.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's start then by identifying the landscape effects that you have found in your evidence. So it's, I think, familiar to us all, but perhaps not to everyone in the room, that is set out in the methodology for landscape visual and impact assessment. The overall effect involves understanding the sensitivity of the receptor, which is a combination of its value and susceptibility. So you have to understand those components before combining that with the magnitude of the change to bring about the overall conclusion on effect. And each one of those components, value, susceptibility, and magnitude, has the ability to affect the overall conclusions
It does, yeah.
of an assessment. So as a starting point to understand the landscape character of an area, one usually consults the published landscape character assessments. Yeah?
Yeah.
And I say starting point because those, of course, aren't site-specific assessments having regard to the particular development concerned, but that's the approach that's advocated in the GLVIA, and it is a source of evidence upon which weight can be put.
Correct.
Agreed?
Yeah.
And in this case, the most relevant, most fine-grained study on landscape character across the council's area is the North Herts Landscape Study, which addresses character sensitivity and capacity, and that's core document 6.5.1. Do you agree?
I do.
So if we open that up, 6.5.1,
yeah,
we can also agree that this study provides a useful analysis of the baseline for the character area. And it is a character area assessment that the council refers to in its own development plan.
Yep.
And we can infer from that that the council must regard this landscape study as fit for purpose.
Yep.
And just to make that point good, if we just open the development plan before we delve into the landscape character assessment, for document 4.1.
Hard copy behind me.
You've got a hard copy.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, I'll give you both then. Core document 4.1, if we go within that to policy NE2, which is page 152 of the PDF or 150 internal.
Yeah.
Just wait for the... So this is policy NE2, which concerns landscape.
Yep.
And what that says is that planning permission will be granted for development proposals that respect the sensitivities of the relevant landscape character area and have regard to the guidelines identified for built development and landscape management.
Yep.
And what that's referring to is the 2011 landscape study that we're about to look at.
Yeah, in the footnote.
Yeah. And we can see when we go down to 11.7 of the explanatory text that sits below that policy, that the guidelines referred to at criterion A of the policy originate from that landscape study, which provides an assessment of the character areas. There are 37 landscape character areas covering the district, 37. Some lie totally within the district and some, while some extend into adjoining districts. So the study that we're about to look at is important for understanding the way in which policy should be interpreted and applied.
Yeah.
It's a study upon which weight can be placed in this inquiry.
Yep.
It's a study which has been subject to examination.
Yep.
The council hasn't, so far as I'm aware, resolved to disregard it in any way.
No.
And insofar as the document is now 24 years old, you haven't identified, Mr. Reynolds, anything about the site that has changed in the intervening period that would change the outcome of that assessment.
I think in my proof I talk about my experience on the ground being slightly different, particularly into the impact of the airport.
That's your personal experience. I'm talking about things that have changed on the ground, factors in terms of new development that's come forward in that time, or anything that might have changed to alter the conclusions of that assessment. And you haven't identified anything in the last 24 years that could impact on that assessment. Agreed?
No, agreed.
Okay, well, let's go to that assessment then, 6.5.1. And we know from the number of character areas assessed and the images throughout this document that it covers a significant number of landscape character areas. We can agree this is a fine grain analysis, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not, I would say it's fairly normal for a district scale landscape character assessment.
Well, I'm sure throughout the country we've seen all sorts of different landscape character assessments, but we know that essentially this is analysis following the topographical nature of the area, has some very narrow character areas indeed.
Yeah,
we can agree that, and we'll look at that in terms of the diagram later. But we're concerned with area 202, which is the Breachwood Green Ridge, and that begins at page 97 of the document in terms of the location assessment, evaluation, and guidelines.
yeah.
And Mum, have you been given the landscape and visual topic paper? That's Mr. Morris's Appendix 1. Yeah. There's a useful plan that it's probably helpful to have out at this stage to understand the character areas we're looking at. And it's the first plan after the text within Appendix 1. So it's called document 11.1.3, forgive me. So appendix, landscape and visual topic paper. And if you go, it's got a load of text that goes up to page 59 and then the plan starts. And the first plan within that is the character area plan. Oh, I can see it. It's your right hand's on it, I think. Yeah, so we can see the character areas, and we're concerned with the blue one here on Mr. Morris's plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. So area 202, and it's that character area in the site's landscape character which are going to be the focus of my questions, because that's where you identify the greatest effects arising from the scheme.
Yeah.
Agreed? So while we're there, actually, if you can take up as well inquiry document 1, which is the landscape tables.
Yeah.
We can see there we've got essentially all the character areas that have the potential for direct impacts and indirect impacts.
Yeah.
And it's the site landscape character and the Breachwood Green Ridge where you identify moderate to substantial landscape character effects.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And can I just check, in respect of the site landscape character and the Breachwood Ridge, are your conclusions faithfully transposed into this table? You don't take any issue with the information that's set out there?
In relation to that, those two, I don't think I've got any issues. No.
Okay, thank you. We can see from the plan in the landscape topic paper, the colourful landscape character area plan that we're looking at, that there's also an area of the site which is in the Lily Bottom character area, which is 212, but we agree that there will be no built development within that character area, so any effect will not be a direct impact.
Correct, yeah.
Panels were removed from that area, and that's now going to accommodate biodiversity and a new footpath connection. Yeah. And do you agree that the Lily Bottom character area is of a notably better landscape character to the Breachwood Green Ridge character area?
I don't know that I'd say it's noticeably better. I haven't
No,
no,
if you haven't considered it.
I mean, I've considered it, but only in the relation to the site. So I haven't considered the impact on the northern end of that character area.
Because that's what the case officer said in the report to committee.
Yeah.
You recall reading that?
Yeah.
That the Lily Bottom character area is of a notably better landscape character. That's at 4.10.53.
Yeah.
4.10.53 of the report to committee. And when we turn over in Mr. Morris's landscape appendices, you'll see a sensitivity plan there as well, taken from the Character Sensitivity and Capacity Study 2011.
Yeah.
Which shows that study regarded the Lily Bottom character area as more sensitive.
Yeah.
That was a moderate to high.
think part of that will be because a large portion of that is within the national landscape, which obviously has a
Yeah,
bearing.
which is a pretty good reason to up its sensitivity, yeah?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So to the landscape character area assessment then, page 97 sets out the landscape character and the key characteristics and distinctive features of this area. And you take no issue with what the character appraisal is identifying as the components of the character area, yeah?
No.
And when we go over the page to page 98, we see the physical influences. And it looks at a number of different areas, geology and soils, topography, etc. And when we look over to the right-hand column, do you see the heading field pattern?
Yes.
And what it says about field pattern comes under the heading of historical and cultural influences. And it says the historic agricultural landscape pattern consists of a mixture of pre-18th century irregular enclosure and prairie fields with both post-1950s boundary loss and relict elements. Patches of ancient woodland line the south, and informal medieval parkland occurs in far north and far south. There are varying sizes of fields. However, the pattern is locally degraded, especially where intensive arable production dominates.
Yeah.
And that's the case in respect of the appeal site, that there has been a significant loss of historic hedgerow boundary.
Yes.
And we can see that within Mr. Morris's topic paper, if we turn up plan LM06. So, Mum, that's towards the back. Of the document you've got. There's a series of plans. Historic plans, so look for the ones that appear to have sort of a grey-brown hue. So we've got, it starts with OS mapping from 1888 to 1915, then 1937 to 1961. And then what Mr. Morris has done in figure 6.3 is he shows the loss of field boundary compared to the historic mapping within the red line area of the site. And they're denoted with the yellow lines. You see that?
Yeah.
So there has been significant loss of historic hedgerow boundary within the appeal site. Agreed?
Yeah, it's fairly standard, yeah.
Yeah. And when we go then back into the landscape study to the evaluation, we pick up these comments. Visual and sensory perception is the first one. Woodland areas help to provide a cohesive visual integrity to some parts. However, arable areas are bland and featureless. Tranquility improves further away from the urban fringe of Luton. However, aircraft noise is an issue. And we remind ourselves that this study was undertaken, of course, some time ago and doesn't account for the growth of Luton Airport since.
No, but as I said, I don't agree with that. And I think Landscape Partnership in their review also disagree with that. They say in TLP's assessment, it's a more tranquil countryside than described in the HNLS. While aircraft noise is frequent, built form relating to the airport is limited and not considered a detraction, with the view of the control tower considered a landmark. And I would agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, that's one for the inspector to review on site, but it's not just the historic growth since this character assessment was compiled, but also the growth by many, many more passengers that the airport is expected to receive as a result of the expansion DCO, yes? Well,
that would be part of a cumulative assessment. It's not part of the baseline assessment because that's not there.
It's been granted consent though, hasn't it?
But it's not part of the baseline assessment at the time that I did this. It hadn't been granted consent.
Oh, I see. I see the point you're making. Yeah. But certainly a consideration for the inspector to have regard to in terms of the impact that might have on tranquility. Agreed?
Yes,
Yeah.
although obviously in terms of airplane movements, I would say yes, but obviously the most of the built form is not within this area. Most of the works in this area are off-site landscape changes.
Yeah. Understood. And it's not only the sensory perception that Luton Airport is noted to have an impact on, but it's regarded as having a visual impact as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Not just in terms of the physical structures that are there, but also as being a source of light pollution within the landscape. You see that?
Yes.
In terms of rarity and distinctiveness, we see there the features of this character area are not regarded as uncommon.
That's what it says, yeah.
It's said to share many similarities to adjacent plateau landscape.
I would agree that, yeah, including the national landscape to the north.
And that feeds into the condition on the next page, which is regarded as poor, and the robustness, which is regarded as moderate.
Yeah, and I would disagree with that assessment, as did Landscape Partnership.
Yeah. Well, again, we're going to come to have a look at what they said. But what that leads to, we can see on the bottom of page 100 of the PDF, is a recommendation to improve and restore this landscape.
Yeah.
And that's because the assessors of the landscape area regard the Breachwood Green Ridge as being capable of being improved.
From a landscape perspective, yes.
Yeah. And we note, don't we, of course, that when the people who are compiling this study were putting it together, they're carrying out a comparative analysis across the whole of the district, looking at all the character areas. Yeah.
The whole of the county, actually. So I think this is taken from a county.
Forgive me. Yeah, whole of the county. So it's a comparative exercise which allows them to understand where comparatively this landscape falls on the spectrum of sensitivity of different landscapes within the area.
I wouldn't necessarily characterize it in that way. This isn't assessing one landscape character area against another. It's assessing the landscape character area against, if you like, a kind of model landscape, rather than, it's not assessing one character area against a different one. So it's not saying improve and restore to make it more like another area. It's saying this landscape area could be improved and restored.
That's not what I'm suggesting to you, Mr. Reynolds. What I'm suggesting is that all landscape character assessment is a comparative exercise that understands that there are landscapes which are of higher sensitivity and more valuable, and those which are less so. And it attempts to put particular landscapes, whether it's a character area as a whole or a site at a site-specific level, somewhere on the spectrum of sensitivity.
Yeah, but not in comparison with another landscape, but as an absolute on its own.
And we see when we look at the table on page 100, of course, that there's lots of different sort of categories that this can fall into. But we note that this is not a landscape which is in the category of strengthen, conserve, or safeguard.
No, it's not listed as a good condition.
Yeah. Let's have a look then at page 101. Landscape character sensitivities.
Yeah.
They're listed on the next page, and that notes that hedgerow removal has created large arable fields. That's not something that this character assessment regards as a good thing, is it?
No.
It does note that there's good public access with numerous rights of way radiating from the villages, including the Chiltern Way. And we can agree this is an area that's well served by public footpaths.
Yep.
Both in the site, but also in the landscape surrounding it and beyond.
Yep.
And that concludes landscape sensitivity of moderate.
Yep.
You see that in the right-hand column. The same is true of visual sensitivities, moderate sensitivities. And when we come to landscape value, so bottom right-hand column, we can see that value is moderate to low. That's what this study has as its overall conclusion on value.
Yeah.
And that's a judgment, of course, that's based on all the factors that have been explored throughout the assessment of the character area in the preceding pages.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's go to your proof, please. Don't put that assessment away. And Mum, we'll break in a moment when we've just dealt with this point. At 4.2.13, you say you disagree with the assessment for essentially 3 reasons.
Yeah.
The first is that the visual impacts of the airport are less than one would expect.
Yeah.
It's one for the inspector to have a look at on site. Second, you say it doesn't have the impact on tranquility suggested by the LCA evaluation.
Correct.
Again, matters for the inspector to resolve from her site visit, but also having regard to the fact that the recent DCO approval granted is with the specific purpose of expanding the airport's operation and accommodating more flights.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that's outside of the landscape character area.
And finally, you say that the historic and cultural pattern of the individual hamlets and network of lanes remains strong.
Yes.
Those were matters, weren't they, that fed into the landscape character assessment?
They're matters that are addressed, yes.
Yeah.
But
So
I've kind of graded them differently. So it addressed the impact of the airport, and I'm saying that I think it's less of an impact than the landscape character assessment says.
Well, it's this point about the historic and cultural pattern of the individual hamlets and the network of lanes remaining strong, because when we look to page 101 of the assessment and the first bullet point on the left-hand side, it says the historic settlement pattern within the character area is characterised by dispersed villages, hamlets and scattered farmsteads on the highest ground in the northern half of Breachwood Green Ridge, which would be sensitive to unsympathetic development, not in scale with the villages. You see that?
Yep.
And then it also says, if you cast your eye down to the bullet point beginning, the strong cultural pattern. Do you see that?
Yep.
Just a few bullet points down. The strong cultural pattern of narrow and twisting minor lanes and historic woodlands would be vulnerable to improvements, to upgrading of the roads and variations to the traditional relationships between elements. You see that?
Yeah.
And so the point is that those are factors that the assessors, in looking at this landscape character area, did have regard to. The things that you point out as being particular matters that you say enhance the sensitivity or value of this area.
Yes, but I'm not suggesting they didn't have consideration of them. I'm just saying that my assessment of them is different to the one they had.
How?
Because it says here, for example, that that first paragraph, the historic settlement pattern, which would be sensitive to unsympathetic development, not in scale with the villages. So susceptibility is based on the ability of the landscape to accept a particular form of development, and susceptibility feeds into sensitivity. So in my view, the appeal scheme is an unsympathetic development that's not in scale with the villages. So therefore, the susceptibility to that type of development has to feed into the sensitivity assessment. But there, in this document, there's no mention of solar farms because they don't take it into account. So that's what I'm saying. That's why my review of it differs to this review of it. And in fact, Landscape Partnership also have a different opinion in their review of the application, the LVIA, and Landscape Partnership are the same consultancy that prepared the landscape study. So even they, as a single consultancy, say, actually, we don't agree with parts of the landscape character assessment. And yet this 2011 document is their document.
You're conflating a lot of issues there, Mr.
No,
Reynolds, I'm afraid. We're talking about value at the moment and the reasons why your conclusion on value differ to this study.
Sensitivity. It says inherent landscape sensitivity.
Let me finish my question. We're talking about value because your commentary on value, and it's the particular conclusion of moderate low landscape value with which you're disagreeing with, is not the overall sensitivity judgment. It's one aspect of the sensitivity judgment. Susceptibility is an entirely different question. The question I'm putting to you is, where do you differ from the assessment of this study in respect of landscape sensitivity when it talks about historic settlement pattern being sensitive to unsympathetic development? Because that seems to be a distinction you're trying to draw within your proof of evidence. But it's not there. There is no distinction.
Sorry, I'm really confused. So this section of the published document is inherent landscape sensitivity. We're looking at a subheading landscape character sensitivities, which feeds into their assessment of moderate sensitivity. And what I'm saying is I've said it's moderate to high sensitivity in my assessment. And one of the reasons for that is because I believe that the type of development we're talking about, solar farm, is a development that is unsympathetic development, not in scale with the villages, which is clearly, it says here, it would be so that it's sensitive to unsympathetic development, not in scale with the villages. So that's why my assessment of sensitivity is higher than the published assessment of sensitivity. I don't get why you're saying it's about value.
Okay. There's three reasons you've listed why you depart from the landscape character study in its conclusions that you've arrived at. We've addressed two of them. That's Luton Airport, and the inspector's going to have regard to that. The other is because of the historic and cultural pattern of the individual hamlets and the network of lanes that you say remain strong. My point to you, Mr. Reynolds, is that is a matter that the landscape study took into account in arriving at its overall conclusions. Do we agree?
The topic is something it addressed.
Yeah.
Its assessment of that topic within this character area, I have disagreed with. So I have a different opinion.
And that was where I was trying to understand where the difference between you and the character assessment was, because this character assessment finds that this is a character area that's characterised by dispersed villages, hamlets and scattered farmsteads on the highest ground in the northern half of the Breachwood Green Ridge, and that it would be sensitive to unsympathetic development not in scale with the villages. So where do you disagree with that?
I'm not saying I do disagree with
You
it.
don't disagree with that.
But
right.
what I'm saying is sensitivity, that's talking about an aspect of sensitivity. The other, so what I said in my proof, what I disagree with is I think it's more tranquil than this suggests. This suggests that the airport has an impact on tranquility, which we've already talked about.
Yeah.
I've also said I think that it states in here that there's which one is it? Moderate impact of built development. I don't agree that there's a moderate impact of built development, as I said in my proof. And that's not just the airport, that's the edge of Luton and everything else. I think the edge of Luton is actually very well screened from this area.
Hang on, let me just make a note that the edge of Luton is very well screened. Yeah, thank you. And would remain so with the urban extension in place.
Well,
sort
yeah,
of delving into cumulative points now, but it would still remain very well screened.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting it wouldn't be very well screened, but what I'm saying is I'm undertaking a baseline of the landscape as it is today.
Yeah.
So I have to factor in these things. So what you're saying to me is, where do you differ from what it says in the LCA? Where I differ is, I think the impact of built development, I would not say is moderate. I would say it's low on that condition table.
Yeah.
And I would also say that the distinctive rarity, which it says is frequent, that's fine, but I wouldn't lower the score just because it's not a rare landscape. And again, that's entirely backed up by the TLP assessment, which say exactly the same thing.
Okay. Well, we're going to come and have a look at TLP then after a short break. Mr. Reynolds, thank you.
If we can come back at 25 too. Thank you. So if you want to resume, please.
Thank you, Mum. Mr. Reynolds, we're in your proof at page 23.
Yeah.
That's internal page 23, 4.2.14. And if you can take up core document 716, which is the Landscape Partnership's first review.
Yeah.
And go in there to page 15 of 52.
Got the paragraph number.
Yeah, it's 3.2.19.
Yeah.
Yeah. So page 15 of 52, 3.2.19. And what you say at 4.2.14 of your proof is, I also agree with the Landscape Partnership Assessment at paragraph 3.2.19, where it states that the value of the LCA in the study area is influenced by a number of key sensitivities set out in the LCA. As such, my opinion is that a landscape value of moderate, medium to high is more appropriate for the LCA as a whole.
Yeah.
And when we look at what the Landscape Partnership said in their view, it was that the landscape value of the Breachwood Green Ridge in the vicinity of the site is moderate rather than moderate low.
Yes.
That's their professional opinion. So we've got the landscape character assessment, which says moderate low. We've got the landscape partnership in this review about the site and the immediate vicinity that put it as moderate. And then you go one step further, even higher than that, and you've got moderate to high.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we note that your judgment on value is provided within your proof of evidence without reference to the Landscape Institute's technical guidance note 2 of 21, which deals with landscape value outside of designated.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you haven't done a GLVIA box 5.1 exercise.
No,
as it's sometimes
actually slightly different process when you're between LVIA assessment and strategic landscape assessment, and this is strategic landscape assessment.
Yeah, but this is informing your view because you're not looking at the landscape character area as a whole. What you're doing is you're looking at the landscape character of the site in its immediate vicinity as it sits within the character area.
Study area, yeah.
Yeah. So the study area, exactly. The area over which the appeal site exerts an influence. Yeah. But it's right that you haven't provided, as a matter of fact, any value assessment in accordance with either the technical guidance note from the Landscape Institute or box 5.1 as part of your evidence.
No, because that wasn't the exercise I was undertaking.
Yeah. Let's go to the methodology then that you say you've used, which is core document CD 117. So you recall that from the chapter of the environmental statement.
Yeah.
And how your assessment of value translates into what's set out there. If you can go with me to page 62 of the PDF. So page 62, you'll see sensitivity of the receptor landscape is the heading. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we visited here already.
Yeah.
And what we can see on the left-hand side is, well, we've got the spectrum negligible to high, and then we've got value as our first substantive column. And at the top, as one would expect, are landscapes of the highest value, those which are internationally or nationally designated.
Yep.
Below that, there are locally designated landscapes.
Well, that's one of the factors. There's also another paragraph in between. A very distinctive landscape with strong, widespread and defining characteristics, high quality with no detracting features, contains features that could be described as unique or nationally scarce, considerable conservation and or recreational stroke heritage.
Yeah.
So it's not just whether it's designated that you take into account when you do that assessment.
Okay, so we've got internationally, nationally at the top, and that includes World Heritage Sites, national parks, etc.
Yeah.
And then we've got a very distinctive landscape.
Yeah.
High quality with no detracting features, and certain features that could be described as unique or are nationally scarce.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a description that applies to this site, is it?
It doesn't have any unique or nationally scarce features, but I would say that it's a very distinctive landscape with strong, widespread and defining characteristics. And I would say that it's high quality with no detracting features. So I'd say elements of that are accurate for this landscape.
Elements of that are accurate. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's deal with designated landscapes first of all. We agree that obviously this is not a site which is nationally or locally designated for its landscape value or beauty.
Not, no.
And we agree that it's not a valued landscape for the purposes of the framework. That's a matter of agreement in the Statement of Common Ground. And it's not designated for any reason relating to natural heritage or biodiversity either, is it?
Aware of.
We note that in the area of the site and immediate surrounds, there are heritage assets that have been considered by experts on behalf of the main parties, but the historic field pattern, as we've already addressed, has been degraded.
Yeah.
And intensive arable agriculture on this site has had an adverse impact on the landscape condition of the site.
Yeah, as it has on most landscape in this
Yeah.
country.
And that's in terms of the intactness of the landscape, its condition, removal of hedgerows.
Yeah,
etc.
yeah, and also soil condition and other factors.
Yeah. There are no associations between the site and its immediate context and notable people, events, or arts that you've brought to the inspector's attention.
No.
And distinctness and rarity as a topic area is not something you've addressed in your proof. But we can agree this, can't we, that the site and its immediate environs could not be described as having rare landscape elements that would enhance its value.
Not rarity, but it does have distinctiveness, and it has features which are similar to the national landscape further to the north, which is presumably why it was put forward as a potential candidate for expansion of the national landscape as well.
On that, can I just understand what you say that the distinctiveness of the site is, so I can speak to Mr. Morris about it in his evidence?
So if you look at the landscape character of the Chiltern Hills generally, it's to do with the undulation of the landscape. It's a rolling landscape form, so there's a lot of undulation. There's kind of folds within the landscape. I think we heard a little bit earlier on about the way that that's the problems that might cause with funneling water. So it has a kind of distinctive topography to it. It also, in terms of the kind of landscape features, it has got the arable, obviously it's a lot of arable use, but it's also got some dispersed fragment woodland. It's got where the hedgerows remain, they've got hedgerows with hedgerow trees, and hedgerows on banks, although some of those have been lost and you just have the banks remain, but they're all quite characteristic features of the wider Chiltern landscape.
Right. So far I've got distinctive topography, the fact it's in arable use, that there's hedgerows and there's trees. That's what you're saying is distinctive about this area.
No, that's not what I'm saying is distinctive about the area. I'm saying that they are elements of what makes the landscape distinctive. You could say that about any national landscape. Well, hang on, it's just some fields and trees, so why is it special? So that's the character of the Chiltern landscape, and parts of the Chiltern landscape are designated as national landscape. And as Landscape Partnership said in their summary, this landscape shares many of those features and characteristics with the wider Chiltern landscape. And as we know, this area had been put forward as a candidate for potential expansion of the national landscape. So this isn't just me saying, oh, there's some trees and fields and hedgerows, that makes it distinctive.
Yeah,
That's an opinion of other people. And there's recreational value is another thing. There's public rights of way. We know they're well used. You can see they're well used. So it has got high recreational value. So
Yeah.
all of those things increase the value of the landscape.
Yeah, the Landscape Partnership was aware of all of those things that you've just mentioned when it came to its conclusion of moderate sensitivity, wasn't it?
It talks about them, but as I said, my opinion is that there are elements which are higher in terms of their importance and significance than Landscape Partnership. This is all professional judgment. The 2011 landscape study, we didn't look at the methodology for it when we were talking before the break, but it clearly says in there, the following provides a basis for determining sensitivity judgments. However, they are professional judgments, and it sets out what it thinks makes high sensitivity, moderate sensitivity, and low sensitivity. And I think that's what I've used is the source methodology. I've looked at that, and I've looked at what it's put as its assessment, and I think it underestimates it. Landscape Partnership thought it underestimated it. I thought it underestimated it more, but that's a professional judgment.
Yeah. Okay. Can we just look at the methodology and agree this? This is not a site. Well, I'm taking this site in its immediate environs that contains features that could be described as unique.
Not unique.
No, it's not a site or environs that could be described as containing features which are nationally scarce.
No.
No. Okay.
But
There,
but it does. I do say that it's high quality with no detracting features. And I would say that there is considerable recreational.
okay.
Doesn't say recreational what, but I'd say recreational use. And then if you go down to if you then skip over the locally designated, e.g. public open space, there's reasonably distinctive landscape townscape with some strong contributing characteristics. So my opinion was that is in the middle, very distinctive is higher up. I place it somewhere between those two, hence moderate to high. So it's entirely in line with that methodology.
The site itself,
Yeah,
is not likely to be a visitor destination, is it?
it's frequently visited. Every time I've been out there, I've seen people running, walking, cycling. It's very well used. We heard this morning it's a self-guided walking route on the CPRE website.
Yeah.
So it's a well-used recreational. It's part of the Chiltern Way, which is a recreational route.
No, the Chiltern Way's off-site.
It runs along the edge of the site.
But what I'm talking about is the site itself, the area within the red line. Are people going to get in their cars from distance and make a journey to go and visit this appeal site specifically as a visitor destination in the same way that one might visit a national park?
I think people who live locally would go here to experience the countryside. It's very close to an urban area. And actually, those areas are very well used by members of the public because very quickly you're outside of the urban area. So I do believe that people would go here to walk their dogs, go for walks, go for bike rides. We heard it this morning. The residents told us that's what they use it for.
Yeah, forgive me. You're not engaging with the question, Mr. Reynolds. No one is disputing that local people use this area. What I'm talking about, there is a distinction between an area that's used for local recreation by people who live in proximity to a site and people who will travel some distance to go and visit a place which is demonstrably special in landscape terms. This falls in the former category, doesn't it?
I think there will be people from within Luton that would come here. I'm not going to say that someone's going to drive down from Scotland to visit this, but it's not, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't have recreational value because it's only local people that use it.
Mr. Reynolds, did I say it didn't have recreational value?
No, but you said there's a differentiation between recreational use. And what I'm saying is there's a differentiation between designated landscape. It's not a national park, but in my opinion, whether the person walking their dog here has walked from Tea Green or has driven from the other side of Luton is irrelevant. It's still the person who's walking their dog because of the landscape. So I don't see that there's a differentiation between where the recreational user has come from.
There are no designated viewpoints marked to or from the site that would be affected by the proposal.
No.
The site itself isn't mentioned specifically in literature that you've been able to find.
No.
The site and its environs are not wild or remote, are they?
Wouldn't say that they were wild and remote, no.
And the site itself doesn't contain any elements that contribute to the healthy functioning of the landscape. And I'm thinking woodlands, floodplains, those sorts of things mentioned in the TGN
not
guidelines.
within the site. Obviously, the red line goes around a woodland, but as I said, my assessment was based on the value criteria set out in the LVIA document, their methodology, not the technical guidance note. I would have assumed that the technical guidance note was used to inform the LVIA methodology, because as you said, no one has said that the methodology in the LVIA was incorrect.
Well, I'm going to put the points that you've made in your cross-examination to Mr. Morris and see what he has to say about that. But another point that you make in support of your findings on value and sensitivity overall is that the LCA evaluation supports your finding because it considered capacity of the character area to accommodate certain types of development.
Yes. Well, it Yeah, it does consider capacity.
Yeah. So if we just go back to that, and I think you made the point in your examination in chief, you fairly accept core document 6.5.1 doesn't consider solar farms.
It doesn't, no.
Because, of course, in 2011, when this study was compiled, schemes of the size proposed here weren't generally a viable option in the UK without subsidy.
No, in fact, it's 2002 when that was put together, so it's even older.
Yeah. And you talk about drawing comparison with large-scale open storage, mineral extraction, waste disposal. But of course, they are of a very different nature and character to solar energy development, aren't they?
They are, and I do say that in my proof.
Yeah. You then draw the inspector's attention to an earlier document, certainly earlier than 2011, and that's core document 6.5.12. Which is the East of Luton Landscape Report, or rather the response to it.
Yeah.
So 6.5.12. So it's another landscape partnership document.
Yep.
And its response to environmental sensitivity study prepared to inform the selection of potential growth areas around Luton and response to the emerging Luton and South Bedfordshire core strategy.
Yeah.
A snappy title for that document. And the study that the Landscape Partnership are reviewing as part of this document was considering future areas of growth around Luton for housing and employment development.
It was, yeah.
And we can see that if we scroll down to page 34 of 69, we can see an indication is also provided in regard to the likely capacity for a range of types of development and a range of scales, and that includes residential employment, green infrastructure, and grey infrastructure.
Yeah.
Again, you fairly accept it was not assessing solar or renewable energy development.
No.
And what we see throughout this document, we've got 69 pages. As I say, it starts with a review by the Landscape Partnership of the work that had been undertaken to assist with the identification of areas for expansion.
Yeah.
And if we go to page 5, just to orientate ourselves within the document, we've got the introduction and summary of conclusions, the critique, so on. That's the Landscape Partnership's review of what's then contained in the appendices, which is the methodology and the land parcel profiles that have been produced. So the Landscape Partnership are looking at that work and really providing an assessment as to whether it or not it makes the standard.
Yeah.
Or is of a good standard. Okay. And what this found, if we go within the summary and conclusions, which start at the bottom of page 6, what the review concluded was that the work that had been done had shortcomings.
Yep.
And it says that at 1.4, a number of shortcomings have been identified with the methodology used in the ESA. And those are particularized from section 2, which begins on page 8, and particularly 2.3. So that's what sets out all the shortcomings that the Landscape Partnership have assessed. And when we get down to F, we see there a description of sensitivity and issues affecting it is given at paragraph 2.1 of the ESA. However, there is no reference in the methodology to the main national guidance of landscape sensitivity and capacity, namely topic paper 6. This document identifies the main landscape character and visual criteria that should be considered in assessing landscape sensitivity. The ESA does not set out a transparent and repeatable method to use of the criteria identified in topic paper 6 and how it applies to the site assessments. The commentary provided has some good and pertinent points, but is variable in coverage. So one of the significant shortcomings identified in this report was around the analysis of sensitivity.
Yeah, in the original, in the other document that they're reviewing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Landscape Partnership was critical of the way in which those judgments had been reached. Yeah.
Yes.
And then you rely on those judgments to support your conclusion in respect of the sensitivity of this site, because it's part of the Tea Green Plateau that was considered to be high sensitivity.
No, because that they go on to make their own assessment, and it's their assessment that I'm relying on.
Their assessment that you're relying on.
They critique the original methodology and then make their own assessment.
Well, let's have a look at that, if we can. Again, this was a study looking at permanent housing and employment.
Yeah.
And we are concerned with the Tea Green Plateau,
Yeah.
which the original study found to be of high sensitivity in respect of the type of development that it was looking at. So if we go down to 46, page 46.
Yeah.
So if we see page 46 there, that's the land parcel with which we're concerned, isn't it? Tea Green Plateau.
Yeah.
And just to understand as well what we're looking at, probably if you can bookmark that page, then do so, because we want to scroll down to page, this is a problem, isn't it, with looking at things on screen. Scroll down to page 67, take a mental snapshot of the areas we're looking at.
Yeah.
So we're looking at LC, area LC there, yes?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
And we can observe, can't we, as well, that LA, the area to the west, that's the area in which the East of Luton development is, yeah? That's the Coconut Plateau.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll just flag up that those were the two relevant areas. And then if we go back to page 46, which is where our LCT Tea Green Plateau starts.
Yeah.
Sorry, forgive me. Yeah, that in respect of landscape quality, page 46, noted that this was an area in moderate to poor condition. There are some areas of extensive arable farmland with minimal hedgerows, notably between Tea Green and Breachwood Green. There are sections of gappy or remnant hedges.
Yeah.
And that study found, in terms of overall sensitivity, that the area was medium-high sensitivity.
Yeah, same as me.
Same as you. So you rely on that.
Well, I felt it supported my. I didn't rely on it. I felt it supported my position.
Yeah. Okay. So it bolsters and supports your finding.
Correct.
Okay. Well, let's scroll back up then to see what the same report considered in respect of parcel LA, which was the Coconut Plateau.
Yep.
I hope I'm saying that correctly. That's on page 42.
Yep.
That was also considered. If you scroll down, you'll see overall sensitivity medium high.
Yep.
That study found the same overall sensitivity for that character area of medium high sensitivity, yes?
Yeah.
With a medium low capacity for development.
Correct.
That didn't stop the council allocating that area for a large strategic housing mixed use urban extension, did it?
No.
So same sensitivity, same capacity as this area, and the council allocates it for some thousands of homes. But one might speculate that the council and indeed the examining inspector for the local plan didn't agree with the findings of this study, or certainly didn't regard it as a bar to developing the areas in question.
No, but I don't know what other factors went into it. You know, this is one of many factors that would have gone into that decision. The point is that it supports it agrees that the sensitivity of that landscape is medium to high. And that was my conclusion, that the sensitivity of that landscape is medium to high. I don't say that it's a bar. I just report what I think the landscape is. And that's what I said it is.
And again, when we're looking at overall sensitivity, overall capacity, we're having regard to the particular type of development that's being proposed. Or the type of development upon which the study's focused.
So when you're doing an LVIA, you look at susceptibility, and that it relates to the specific type of development that's proposed. This assessment actually is slightly different, because what it says is that it does the sensitivity assessment, and then it talks about susceptibility kind of as the counterbalance to that. So it says medium to high sensitivity, and then it has susceptibility to certain types of development, and they vary. They're all lowish, but I think some are lower than others. So it hasn't, I don't think on this, it's factored that into the sensitivity side of the equation, because you'd be doing the same, you'd be putting susceptibility in twice if you.
Okay. But we know for our purposes that we can't determine sensitivity of this site and its environs without considering its susceptibility to the specific development proposed.
Yeah, so my assessment, that is the type of development proposed is a factor, as I set out in my proof.
Yeah. And when you talk about capacity of the LCA at 4.2.17,
yeah,
being low to moderate for the type of development concern,
yeah.
Are you equating capacity with susceptibility? Are you using those words interchangeably?
No, because they're interlinked but slightly different. So susceptibility is around how easily the landscape could accommodate a specific type of development, whereas capacity is how much of that type of development. So something could have capacity for a small amount of solar farm, but not have capacity for a large amount of it. But its susceptibility to solar farm would inform what its capacity was, if that makes sense.
So we're concerned for our GLVIA analysis, and when we're applying the methodology set out in the ES, we're concerned with the concept of susceptibility.
Yeah.
So the ability of the receiving landscape to accommodate the change without undue consequences for the baseline. And for that, we can agree one has to understand the baseline.
Yeah.
That is the elements, the landscape elements that combine together to make up the landscape character.
Yep.
And how that will change. And how it won't change.
Yep.
So what won't change with the solar scheme in place, and also what might be improved as a result of the change.
Yep.
And there's a difference, isn't there, between development of a site permanently for housing or other urban development and a solar farm. Different types of development going to have
different types of development. Yeah.
Now, large-scale solar farms are becoming increasingly more common in the countryside.
Yep.
Because schemes of this scale are seldom, if ever, accommodated in the urban area. I can't think of a single example.
I wouldn't. I can't say I've looked.
So large-scale solar development is inherently characteristic of a countryside location, isn't it?
No, just because they're located in the countryside, it doesn't mean they're characteristic of the countryside.
But they're only located in the countryside, Mr. Reynolds, aren't they? Schemes of this scale are only located in fields in the countryside, outside of settlement.
Doesn't mean that they're characteristic of the countryside, just because that's where they're located. I suppose what I'm saying is every solar farm might be in the countryside, but it doesn't mean all countryside has solar farms in it.
No, well, we can agree that. Well, that's self-evident, isn't it?
So then it's not a characteristic of the countryside. If you said to me, what's the countryside? I wouldn't say trees, hedges, fields, solar farms. That's my point. So that's my point.
The site, we agree, is currently a site in countryside.
Yes.
The baseline of the site is a rural landscape with intensively farmed fields and some hedgerows and some trees.
It's an agricultural landscape, yeah.
Agricultural landscape, that's fair. Following the development, the site would continue to be a rural landscape with a solar farm in it, wouldn't it?
It will, yeah, the wider landscape will continue to be that. The site itself will no longer continue to be that because it will have a solar farm in it, which is not an agricultural use. You'll lose things like seasonality. So one of the big aspects of character at the moment is seasonality. So when you go there, you have in the summer, basically you could tell the seasons by standing there. You'll lose that seasonality with the solar farm because it will look the same in the winter as it looks in the summer.
Well, there is a significant quantum of planting proposed as part of the scheme. Part of what and tree planting as well, biodiversity areas as well. Part of what your case is that in the winter there would be greater visibility through the hedgerows.
In places, yeah.
And with deciduous planting, there will, of course, always be an impression of seasonality.
There'll be some, but it's a material fact that by losing the seasonality of the crop cycle, it will impact on the seasonality of the landscape.
It will impact on the seasonality of the landscape,
yeah.
which is the same for any solar farm in a rural area.
I'm not saying that
takes it out of intensive arable production.
But it doesn't mean that you don't take it into account just because it's what any solar farm would do.
With the scheme in place, the site and its environs would still be perceived as a rural landscape, wouldn't it?
It would be lessened because it would be introducing a non-agricultural feature.
But solar farms aren't settlement, are they?
No, but they're physical structures, they're industrial structures. There's also going to be water tanks and inverters and it's not just the panels. So there's other features which are inherently industrial in their character.
Well, you say inherently industrial. Let's just address that. This is energy infrastructure.
Yep.
It is quite apart from even traditional energy infrastructure like power stations. It is of a different nature, character. It's inherently quiet development. Yes? The panels themselves are inherently quiet.
Yes, there's some noise from the transformers, but not significant, I wouldn't say, noise.
So again, a contrast with, for example, industrial development that might involve large-scale open storage with lorries coming to and from it every day, the movement of materials, the noise, the dust, the employees. Yes,
it varies massively.
Yeah.
It could be a surface storage facility that has very little noise.
You said industrial. There is a distinction to be drawn, isn't there, between traditional industrial development and a solar farm? And I say that's because this is regarded as energy infrastructure, not industrial development.
I would say it is industrial in character. It's not industrial development.
And of course, all of the field boundaries would remain legible and, in fact, would be enhanced as part of this scheme.
There'd be some restoration of field boundaries. There's also some restoration of field boundaries through the airport scheme that would happen with or without this scheme. And actually, I think visually speaking, the double hedgerows that are being proposed either side of the footpaths aren't necessarily a characteristic feature of the landscape. You don't normally have two hedgerows between fields. You'd have one hedgerow between fields.
It is nonetheless common mitigation for solar schemes, isn't it?
Oh, it is for solar schemes, yeah.
Yeah. And as for the DCO mitigation planting plans, are you aware of any rights that the promoters of that scheme have secured over this land to implement that mitigation? Do you know if those rights exist?
I don't know.
There would continue to be agricultural use of the site through grazing of sheep.
Potentially, although my understanding is that that may not happen, or it'll be, I think the wording of the condition is it will be looked at or something like that. It's not guaranteed.
Well, we can discuss that when we come to conditions. The appeal site would not become townscape, would it, as a result of this scheme?
It would become townscape. No.
No. So it remains landscape.
Yes.
Yeah. The scheme incorporates, we can agree, significant green infrastructure.
Yes.
The biodiversity interest of the site would be significantly increased.
That's what's stated, but I haven't done any assessment on my own.
Do you have any reason to disagree?
No.
Council's accepted it, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has, yeah.
And again, by contrast to urban development, the panels, and even traditional energy development in the form of power stations, solar panels are low-lying and permeable development in the landscape.
Well, they're relatively high actually. Some of them have been made lower around the edges, but the others are certainly more than human height. They're about 3 meters high, which is taller than a person, I think.
Yeah, you're an urban.
So a number of other buildings which are up to 4 meters high, I think.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say they're low lying.
Forgive me, Mr.
No,
Reynolds.
I mean, obviously they're not, 8-story tower blocks, but I don't know that I would call it low lying per se.
Well, you're an urban designer as
Yeah.
well. You're dual qualified. Help us. What's the average height of a 2-story house?
About 4.5, 5 meters.
Average height of a 2-story house?
It's 5 meters to eaves.
5 meters, right? So to the top?
8.5 for a typical pitched roof.
Yeah. Compared to even a 2-story house, solar panels are low-lying development, aren't they?
They're lower than a house, yes.
Well, the question was, by contrast to urban development, typical urban development, solar panels are low-lying. That's correct,
I think
isn't
the
it?
original question was within the landscape, they're low-lying development, and I said it's relative. So they are lower lying than housing, even single-story housing, but I wouldn't say it was low-lying and permeable. There's no visual permeability because it's taller than a human eye line would be.
There is airspace underneath and between rows of panels, isn't there?
There'll be some underneath, yeah, but I don't know what the angle is without double checking to know at what point that stops. And also there's proposed hedgerow and fencing around the majority of the fields, which will block the views across that field. So if I've got a 3-meter hedgerow that is entirely visually impermeable, I can't see past it. I can't see over it. I can't see under it.
Some decision takers have expressed a sentiment that solar panels sit lightly on the landscape. They don't sit in the landscape like traditional built development. And that's right, isn't it? There is a distinction to be drawn there.
I think, well, physically, because they have a minimal point of interface, i.e. they're on legs.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can agree that solar development is visibly, characteristically, and functionally different to development that might be characterized as urban.
As
yes or no, Mr. Reynolds?
As residential or industrial, I think you can have other urban thing. Urban to me just is non-rural.
Do you want me to put the question again? And I'd like a yes or no answer.
No, I don't. What I'm saying is I wouldn't agree with what your question was. It's non-urban, and I would say no, I don't agree that it's non-urban.
Okay, let's try it this way. Solar development is visibly, characteristically, and functionally different to development that might be characterized as urban development in terms of housing and employment.
Yes.
Yes, it is visibly, characteristically, and functionally different to the development involved at Luton Airport.
One, I'm not sure entirely of all the development at Luton Airport. I don't think it is that different to some of it, actually. For example, expansion of runways and taxiways and surface infrastructure, I would say it's fairly similar to, actually. Okay. It's not the same as a new terminal building, but actually it could be the same as part of the infrastructure at Luton Airport.
Okay, well, I have your answer on that. Thank you. But those matters in terms of the way that solar schemes sit on the landscape, their permeability, the ability to mitigate those impacts, those are all relevant to the susceptibility of the landscape, the receiving landscape in this case, yes?
They are, yeah.
So let's compare and contrast that with the East of Luton scheme, because once that is built out, that area will no longer be part of the Breachwood Green Ridge landscape character area, will it?
Well, technically it will be until someone reassesses it. It won't be characteristic of the Breachwood Green landscape character area, no.
Yeah, it won't be landscape anymore. It'll be townscape.
Yeah.
Yeah, and absorbed into the larger area of Luton.
Yeah.
And I raise the East of Luton because one of the points that you make, and you've made it again in your evidence, is that the appeal scheme would sever the landscape character area.
Yes.
And by sever it, you mean it would extend across its width.
In its entire width, yeah.
Yeah. The development, of course, is still permeable in the sense that there are still green corridors throughout it that would remain post-development of the scheme.
There will be the public rights of way remain.
Yeah, so one can still travel through the scheme and remain in landscape. But let's see.
Sorry, just to say, but the same thing applies with the East of Luton scheme. You'll still better walk through it.
Yeah, but you're not in landscape anymore. You're in townscape. We've agreed that.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is here, you're not in the open countryside anymore. You're in pathways between 3-metre high hedgerows with solar panels either side.
We're going back to your tunnelling effect and we'll come there. But let's just understand this point, this width of the character area and your severing point. The East of Luton scheme does exactly the same, doesn't it?
It does go, yeah, pretty much, yeah. I don't think it goes quite the full way across, but.
The East of Luton scheme, well, you can check that and perhaps come back to me. I think it does. Yeah. But the second point is, of course, that development of the solar farm is temporary and reversible. And after decommissioning, will return to agricultural use.
It could do, yeah.
And in fact, you identify a moderate beneficial effect for the site and a slight to moderate beneficial effect for the character area on decommissioning.
Yes.
So even on your evidence, Mr. Reynolds, the landscape character of the site and its character area will be better off for having had the solar farm in it than it is now.
Yeah, in 40 years' time, it could be, yeah.
Yeah.
But that relies on obviously actually being decommissioned.
Well, that's what conditions are for, Mr. Reynolds, aren't they? Yep. And we're agreed with that. So whatever effect might be felt through this scheme extending across what we can agree is a narrow character area, yes?
Yep.
It is temporary and reversible. By contrast, of course, the East of Luton is a permanent scheme.
Yep.
That won't be reversed. And that point hasn't troubled the council in allocating that area for development, has it?
No, but I'm like I said, I don't know why it was allocated. I wasn't involved in that process. I don't know what other factors were taken into account other than landscape character area. I'm sure there were many.
Now, I want to deal with your setting of the national park point. And can we turn up your rebuttal, please?
Yeah.
To section 2.
Yep.
And within that, you've got a heading errata.
Yep.
And you ask that 5.2.4 of your proof, which is on page 43.
Yep.
You ask that that be replaced with text which omits the previous reference to the national park.
I think I quoted the wrong MPPF paragraph number, I think. Hang on, just find it.
This is quite an important point if that's what you think the error is. MPPF paragraph numbers remain the same. But what it does is it deletes the part of 5.24, which refers to the site forming part of the setting of the Chilterns National Landscape.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're retracting that point. The site doesn't form part of the setting.
Not in a formal setting point of view, no.
No. Okay. And you call that an error?
Yeah.
In your proof of evidence.
Yes.
I mean, an error is sort of a typo or a identified paragraph of the framework. When you wrote your proof, was that something that you considered was an impact of this scheme it's setting on
No,
the
the
Chiltern
mistake
landscape?
was what I meant by that paragraph was what I'd quoted earlier on in my document, which was around the expansion, the proposed expansion of the national landscape. And that's what I'd meant by it. And then I removed it because I realized that actually that it's not part of the setting. It's to do with the proposed expansion of, so that's why I took it out.
So does the same point apply to your paragraph 4.230?
Sorry, which 4.2?
Point 30 on page 26 of your proof. And it's the final sentence of 4.2.30. You suggest that the site should be considered to be part of the setting of the national landscape due to the shared characteristics. Do we delete that too?
I would say yes, we probably should delete the reference to the line, it's the setting of the national landscape. However, I would agree, I wouldn't delete the part that says that it has shared characteristics with the national landscape.
When was the AONB now national landscape designated?
Oh, crikey, no idea.
Okay, I'm sure that's somewhere in the documents. We can look that out. Okay, so we're at 4.230 of your proof. That's page 26. While we are here, I want to talk to you about the issue of BMVAL 4.2.33.
Yeah.
Because what you say there is also no reference to soil quality in the LVIA, omitting the fact that it is mostly BMV agricultural land. Again, these are significant omissions in the context of the requirements of the framework paragraph 187B in particular.
Yeah.
I just understand how this plays into landscape and visual impact assessment. It's an almost novel point. But are you saying that the fact that the LVIA didn't consider landscape and visual impacts in a BMV context is a problem?
I'm saying that the fact the LVIA in its assessment of landscape didn't consider soil, and obviously quality of soil is a BMV point, in my view, is an omission, as I said there, in the LVIA. And one of the reasons we talked about why am I assessing it as being of higher sensitivity than the LVIA, and I would say that one of them is because of the soil quality, which isn't addressed in the LVIA. Soil quality is an important part of landscape assessment. It's a key receptor of the landscape.
Mr. Reynolds, about half the site is BMV and half is not. Are you able to identify which is BMV and which is not by looking at it, by perceiving it with your eyes?
I'm not talking about visual assessment. I'm talking about landscape assessment, which is the landscape as a resource. And soil is as fundamental a part of landscape as resource as a tree or a hedge or any other part of the landscape resource.
Yeah, of course there's difference between landscape and visual effects, but we perceive landscape character with our eyes.
Not about landscape character, it's about landscape. It's very clear in Glivia that landscape assessment should take into account landscape receptors, of which soil is a landscape receptor.
Yeah, so soil might be, but the point you're making here is specifically around BMV and talking about that being a significant emission. So let's just try and understand that. As I've said, around half the site is BMV and half is not.
Yeah.
The growing and harvesting of crops takes place across the whole site. It's not unique to areas covered by BMV. Yeah?
Yeah, I'm not talking about landscape character though. I'm talking about the soil as a resource. And what I'm saying is BMV is a proxy for understanding that that is a a good soil, for want of a better phrase. That's exactly what BMV is about. It's about the quality of the soil.
Yeah, but how does that play into a landscape analysis? That's what I'm trying to
It's a
understand.
fundamental part of it. It's a fundamental part of landscape analysis.
Well, you say this, but how? Explain, Mr. Reynolds, what difference that makes in a landscape character analysis.
It's not a landscape character analysis. It's a landscape. It's a landscape assessment, and the landscape is the receptor. In a visual assessment, people are the receptors, and in a landscape assessment, the landscape resource is the receptor. That's trees, that's hedges, and it's soil. Soil is the fundamental part of the landscape.
Yeah, all the elements landscape elements which combine together to give us the character which we then assess the impact on.
Yes. So so for example, if on another site there was loads of woodland and the proposal involved removing all the woodland and the LVIA hadn't mentioned that all the woodland was being removed, you would say that's quite a big omission that it hasn't picked up on that. So my point is there's no mention of the soil. It may have said it's really good soil, the scheme isn't going to have an impact on it. Fine, if that's what it wants to do. My point was it has completely omitted it, in the same way that if it had omitted talking about the trees or the hedgerow, I would have criticised the LVIA. So I'm criticising it for omitting to mention soil, and I'm using BMV as a proxy for soil quality.
Okay, again, help me understand this. If you were removing all of the trees and hedgerows on site, that would manifest as a landscape character and possibly a visual impact. What are you saying the manifestation of an impact on BMV is?
The loss of soil is probably as greater ecological threat as the energy. It's a biodiversity crisis at the moment. Soil is the most fundamental part of the landscape.
Do you think that the soil on this site will be lost as a result of this scheme?
I'm saying the impact on the soil was not assessed, which I think is an omission. That's what that paragraph says.
That was not the question I asked you. Do you think that the soil on site will be lost as a result of this scheme?
I think the soil will change on site as a result of this scheme.
Have you read any of the evidence on agricultural land quality that's before this inquiry, including that of your own planning witness?
I haven't read it in detail. The planning witness, I've read the planning witness, yes, or I haven't read any of the detailed soil quality documents.
You're not qualified, are you, Mr. Reynolds, to give expert evidence on BMV?
I don't give any comment. My point is the LVIA does not mention soil. That's my point.
No.
And I think soil is an important aspect of landscape assessment. That's well stated in lots of documents.
Can I just come in? In terms of using BMV as a proxy,
yeah,
I mean, BMV obviously takes in much more than just the soil. I mean, it's like the climate and things like that goes into that. So how fair is it to use BMV just as a proxy for, because that's only one element that goes into determining what BMV it's got.
It is, but I mean, I'm not the only person that has done it. I've certainly reviewed other LVAs that have talked about that as an element of landscape. I think without doing, detailed soils analysis, then it is a shorthand proxy for it, to be honest with you. I think it is a reasonable one. Obviously, the better the quality of the soil, the higher the BMV. Probably comes back to my similar point around, not all solar farms might be in the countryside, but not all countryside has solar farms in it. It's probably the same, not all good quality soil has high BMV, but you don't have a high BMV with a bad quality soil.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Let's have a look at the inquiry document number 1, which is tables 1, 2, and 3 from Mr. Morris's rebuttal, if we can. And you'll need to have to hand, again, core document 117 and the methodology.
(117). Sorry, which tables was it?
That's it's the inquiry document number 1, which is the assessment of effect comparison table.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the new ones that were handed
Yeah.
in this morning. So on landscape effects, we find the two biggest effects you identify for landscape are for the site
Yep.
and the host character area. And we note, don't we, for the host character area, the Breachwood Green Ridge LCA, we're talking not about the character area as a whole, but the character area within the study area. So the environs of the site, as it were.
Yeah.
And what we don't find in your proof is your judgments for the character area as a whole on value, susceptibility, or magnitude of effects. You've not provided those.
Not for the character area as a whole.
No. And when you talk about magnitude of effect for the site, you just give one for the entirety of the lifespan of the scheme, essentially. Medium to large. That's at 4.2.37 of your proof.
I think I think I'm talking about years 10 to 40, aren't I? That's what I say in my proof.
At 4.2.36, you give the site as a medium to high value and a medium to high susceptibility, which is the overall sensitivity of medium to high.
Yep.
Then over the page on 4.237, you say that as a result, I would categorize the magnitude of landscape effect as medium to large. So that's for the duration of the scheme, because your effects don't change, do they?
No.
For the site throughout the life.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that magnitude
so it's not only for that period, but it's the same for all the periods.
It's the same for all the periods. And that's because you don't recognize in landscape character terms any advantage to the landscape character through mitigation planting until the scheme itself is decommissioned.
It's because I think that the harm to landscape character from the solar panels would outweigh any benefit that amasses over the lifetime of the scheme.
Well,
So
no,
that's an assessment of the overall. I don't break it down into what's the harm and what's the benefit. It's an overall assessment.
yeah, because I mean, that sounded like a judgment that you're arriving at based on harms and benefits. What we're talking about in this specific question is magnitude. So the magnitude of change to the landscape receptor. And we've got two that I'm focusing on. One landscape receptor is the site itself.
Yeah.
And then the second landscape receptor is the landscape character area, which includes the site and that area around it over which it has an influence. And we can see that your judgments on effects don't change between construction and the end of the scheme's operational life.
No, because
No.
I don't think that it changes that much over the life of it.
Yeah. So it remains the same, and that's why we get moderate to substantial in respect of both.
Yeah.
Now, magnitude, of course, part of magnitude is understanding the geographical extent of the effect.
Yep.
And we can see that when we go to core document 117 and page 63.
Yep.
Now, of course, the landscape character area assessment, that's the Breachwood Green Ridge, it is a larger area than the site itself.
Yep.
So the geographical extent of the scheme within the larger area is less, or would be less.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. But that's not reflected in your assessment, because the upshot is that you've assessed both the site and the LCA in the same way, and you come up with the same effects throughout the lifetime of the scheme.
Geographical extent is only one aspect of it. It's not purely down to the geographical extent.
No, it's size, scale, geographical extent, also duration, reversibility. They're all factors associated with the magnitude of landscape effect.
So the size or scale of the effect is greater on the site, which I would say probably counterbalances any reduction in the geographical area. So that's why they're the same.
Yeah. The impact on the site itself, of course, is a direct effect on landscape character. As soon as you move off site, you're talking about indirect effects. Yeah. But in your case, the mitigation that is proposed as part of this scheme is ineffective in ameliorating landscape character effects off-site throughout the lifetime of the scheme in its immediate environs.
Yeah, I think it is.
And I say it's immediate environs because you accept in respect of other character areas that the effect will be ameliorated.
Yeah, I do. Because I think for this one, it's because it's within that character area. So you don't, the assessment is of the site, but also the character area with the site in it. You don't kind of say, right, well, now let's ignore the site and only look at the character area outside of the site. That site is still within the character area.
Yeah. And you're looking at a localized area over which the
within the
site
2
has a
kilometre study
particular
area. Yeah.
impact. Now, I want to turn back to the long-term benefits you identify to landscape character as a result of the mitigation planting, because that's moderate beneficial on the site and slight to moderate beneficial in respect of the character area within the study area.
Yeah.
And that's a recognition that the strategy for this area is to improve and restore its character.
Yeah, it reflects the hedgerow planting that's proposed, which obviously is only within the red line. So that's why it's a higher benefit within the red line than it is outside of the red line.
Yeah, and let's just turn back to the guidelines, doing full circle, but that's the landscape study at 6.5.1.
Sorry, which guidelines?
So within the landscape character study at 6.5.1, full document 6.5.1, there are guidelines on page 104.
Yep.
And we're concerned here with the landscape management guidelines, yeah?
Yep.
And we read, first bullet point, it is the promotion of ancient woodland to encourage a diverse woodland flora. Then it's promote the creation of buffer zones between intensive arable production and areas of semi-natural habitat, creation of links between habitat areas, promote hedgerow restoration along the lines of historic field boundaries and for the creation of visual links between existing woodland areas, promote use of traditional field hedges in place of post and wire, diversity of hedgerow species and the planting of standard hedgerow trees, maintaining and extending the rights of way network. And again, we see the encouragement of planting of woodlands. So planting hedgerows and trees is something that the landscape character study regards as a very good thing.
That's very good. It certainly highlights it as being something to aspire to. But as I said, I don't necessarily think that the double hedgerows that are being proposed are something that it talks about. It talks about field boundaries, but obviously that would be a single hedgerow field boundary.
Yeah. Just go back to my question, Mr. Reynolds. The strategy for this landscape character area is to improve and restore.
Yeah.
The way in which that is to be achieved is through the landscape management guidelines.
Yeah.
Those landscape and management guidelines recognise and encourage new planting of hedgerows and trees.
Yes.
It regards new planting, not just of hedgerows and trees, but woodland as a positive thing in this character area that will help improve and restore it. Yes?
Yeah, I'm not aware that there's any woodland planting of the type that it's of that scale that's being proposed. There's some coppice planting, but that's not, I wouldn't have said that was woodland of the scale that's talked about.
Is that the question I put, Mr. Reynolds? Because it's going to take
Well,
a lot longer if you keep answering the questions you're putting
You've
yourself.
listed to me a load of bullet points and said the scheme's doing these, isn't it?
I didn't say that wasn't the question, Mr. Reynolds.
I agree that what's listed here are positive benefits.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree that the scheme is delivering all of these. I agree that it's delivering some of these, and that's why I have said that it's a beneficial post year 40.
There is no conflict between this scheme and those guidelines, is there?
I mean, there's no conflict.
There's no conflict. It respects the guidelines. It complies with them where it can, but this is not a scheme which, for example, removes hedgerows and removes trees.
No.
It does the opposite. It provides significant hedgerow and tree planting.
On landscape management, it does, but then there's built development guidelines where I would say that it breaches some of them.
The mitigation that is proposed as part of this scheme has the potential to enhance landscape character elements, doesn't it?
In the post 40-year time frame, yes.
Yeah. And it has the potential to reduce the landscape character effects of the proposal over time.
I don't think it does. It doesn't remove it screens them. It does not remove the landscape panels that are there. So I don't believe there'll be a reduction over time.
Yeah, well, you've found a reduction in respect of indirect effects off site to landscape
Yeah,
character.
because indirect effects are purely visual, whereas the direct effects are physical. So the panels will still be there for the 40 years. They won't be there any more or less in 25 years than they will in year 0.
Okay. I think we'll finish with Greenbelt and then we'll leave visual and cumulative for tomorrow.
Okay.
Because while you acknowledge that landscape planting is a good thing in terms of landscape character, you take a different approach in respect of Greenbelt and visual terms. Yeah.
Yes.
So let's explore that point. You recognise, don't you, that openness is the absence of built development?
Yes.
Built development.
Sorry, there's two aspects. There's physical, which is the absence of built development, and there's visual.
Openness as a concept where it relates to Greenbelt policy is about the absence of built development.
Yeah, it has physical and visual openness is a concept. Let's put it this way, that there is an understanding that openness has a visual component and a spatial component. Correct.
Yeah. Built development does not include hedgerow and tree planting.
No.
And planting cannot be regarded as adversely impacting Greenbelt openness as a matter of policy, guidance or law, can it?
That I don't know. I think visually, I think it does have an impact on openness.
So you think that planting of trees in hedgerow is harmful to the openness of the Greenbelt? Is that your evidence?
I think the way in which people experience, there's an experiential aspect to it. And I think the experience of people within that landscape, they will experience a reduction in openness.
Yeah, I'm not asking you about people's visual experience. Greenbelt isn't a landscape policy, is it?
It's a spatial policy.
It's a spatial policy. Built development doesn't include hedgerow and tree planting. Hedgerow and tree planting is not inappropriate development, therefore, in the Greenbelt, is it? And so it cannot be regarded as adversely impacting Greenbelt openness as a matter of policy or guidance.
I don't know that I can necessarily answer that. I think in terms of its policy position, it's probably a question for Mr. Hughes.
Okay. A landowner is at liberty, of course, to plant hedgerows and trees wherever and whenever they like.
Yes.
And we also know that planting in the Greenbelt is supported by Greenbelt policy and guidance.
Yes.
You can have extensive woodlands within the Greenbelt. They're not regarded as harmful to its openness, are they?
I don't know whether they would be, but you can have them.
The same point was put to the inspector. Gosh, you can tell it's 4:45. The inspector at Harlow Road. Can we go to core document 5.1.4, please? 5.1.4.
Yep.
So this was an appeal decision following an inquiry held in April 2024. You'll see the decision date, the 3rd of May 2024. So that's before government policy on grey belts. That wasn't an issue. And if you look down to paragraph 4, you'll see one of the main issues was the effects of the development on the green belt, its purposes and its openness. You see that?
Yep.
And at paragraph 16, we can see the way the inspector dealt with the argument that you're making here. Because he says this, that contrary to the council's view, the impact on openness arising from new tree and hedge plantings would not erode or be harmful to greenbelt openness or permanence, either during operation of the scheme or following any decommissioning work if left in place. Indeed, it would become a legacy planting, which enhances the character and biodiversity of the area as a welcome scheme benefit.
Okay.
Do you see that?
I do.
So same argument made, planting harmful to the openness of the greenbelt and rejected by the inspector. This inspector is entitled to do the same, isn't she?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think probably that's a good place to pause for the evening. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds.
Okay.
Right, thank you very much. It means you've got time to get away to your appointment with a bit of time to spare. Are there any housekeeping points that people need to raise at this point? One thing I did recall was that at CMC I did ask if I could have a set of the plans at A3 to be provided. If brilliant, thank you very much. Other than that, we'll resume tomorrow at 9:30 then. Thank you very much.